Hello, hello, test. Test, 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 test. Testing. Oh, talking to the wrong thing. All right. Hey.
See a clicker. They must give us the clicker. They must have it back.
Check, 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 check.
Yep, it's on.
No, does it come out?
No, we don't pull it out.
So we have to put the headset on.
Yes, your option is stand here or wear the headset. That's your option. Yep, there, it works. So did you see how to work this? This one goes forward. This one goes back on the slide. And here's your pointer.
This one down here is the forward one.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, this is just the light. It looks like there's a switch here, but it's just that indicator light. Yeah. We'll just leave it here. Are you ready, Anne? Okay, we're going to get started, everyone. So some of you are going to be with us here tomorrow, and it's my pleasure to introduce Walter Tavares, who's leading that session tomorrow. And what we're doing is we've invited colleges to come in to talk about trying to align the baccalaureate or bachelor's degree programs, the curriculum, so that we can make sure that mobility between countries is maintained. So Walter's going to lead that effort. We're happy for that. We're going to do meeting number 2 in the UK. So Walter is an advanced care paramedic with a PhD in health research methodology in the Department of Biostatistics and Clinical Epidemiology. He holds a scientist position with the York Region Paramedic Service, an assistant professor with McMaster University Department of Medicine, coordinator of paramedic programs at Centennial College and the University of Toronto, and he chairs research for the Paramedic Association of Canada. So Walter, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Welcome back to day 2. I'm going to be talking to you about a study that we're doing in York Region Paramedic Services, which is just north of Toronto in Ontario here in Canada. The study that we're working on is called Improving Patient Access, Care, and Transportation. As I mentioned, as Gary mentioned, my name is Walter Tavares, paramedic with York Region Paramedic Services, and also a scientist with them, as well as McMaster University. A couple other people I'll just mention very quickly that are on our team: Ian Drennan, who isn't here, Mike Avenel, Chris Spearin, who is, Dr. Van Diepen, Kelly Van Diepen, Dr. Mercury, and Norm Barrett, who are also involved in this study. So I have no conflicts of interest to disclose, I should share, and also the REB for this particular study was provided by these organizations, so McMaster University being the academic institution, and then these are the 3 hospitals that we worked with, and so we required REB from each of them, which I'll explain here in just a second. And of course, the study was provided or supported by York Region Paramedic Services to do this work. So I'm going to start with this idea that I think everyone in the room can appreciate, and that's this tension between increasing healthcare needs and availability of services. And so you can imagine that that exists in a number of different places. It might be, for example, in access to specialty services, for example. Or it might be in access to certain procedures. Or even long-term care. If you're waiting for long-term care, for example, and you might have a 6 or 8 month wait here in Canada for long-term care services. The point is that there's this big discrepancy at times between these increasing healthcare needs, which comes from an aging and growing population who's living longer and living with more comorbidities, and the services. And so we have to try to find a way to deal with this particular issue. And I'm sure you can come up with other examples, and I know that this group is well informed on this discrepancy or this tension that exists between these 2 issues. One of the places that gets addressed or gets a bit of focus in the literature is in ED use or misuse. And I don't want to make this necessarily about ED use or misuse, but it serves as a nice example of this problem that exists between healthcare needs and what people are looking for in terms of availability. And so when they study ED use and misuse, whether or not it's being misused, they look at things like reliance. So the public has become increasingly reliant on the ED services. This is usually, or this is an indicator of their success, even as long as, or as recent as 10 years ago, the numbers have increased substantially in this time. Availability of other resources like primary care or ambulatory care, whether or not those services are available to people as an indicator of use or reliance on ED services, and also as an admission pathway for some of the primary care services. So one of the ways that they try to deal with this stuff is to come up with some strategies to try to deal with this discrepancy between these 2 systems, or these 2 issues, or this tension that I described. And so one is to come up, as an example, to come up with some financial incentives or patient education, to get people to know when to use or not use emergency department services. And this, again, this is just an example. And so that might be to reduce misuse. Another might be to increase the availability of primary care or ambulatory care services. There's a very close link between primary care, ambulatory care, and emergency care. And so the idea here is to try to reduce need, and a lot of the projects that we heard about yesterday, I should say, was really working on this issue of reducing need. So that's another area. And the other is this care coordination, and again, this is, I'm telling a group of people who know this in terms of increasing care coordination or managed care is another way to try to promote this idea of integrated care. And so one of the things that happens in some settings is that there's a good feedback system that happens between when a patient visits an emergency department and information that funnels back to their primary care physician. So again, there's a nice relationship between those two. And so looking at it this way, you might say that there's this public use, and this is, I'm thinking about 911 access or patients who access services themselves, who make those decisions themselves in terms of when they need it and when they don't need it. And so there's this issue of public use and need, and misuse as well. And so the emergency department and primary care, ambulatory care settings, good relationship between those two in terms of studying this tension that I described right at the beginning. So thinking of a larger healthcare system issue. And so another thing that we could add, obviously in this group, is paramedic services. But if I wasn't speaking to a paramedic group, I would say increasing or adding other services or shifting services is something we should consider on a healthcare system issue. So not just paramedic services, but anything else that you can think of. And so that should be the creative thinking. It should be, how do we establish a nice integrated relationship between these three areas as an example of improving healthcare system issues, promoting healthcare in our areas. And so it got us thinking about whether or not we're contributing to the problem or we're really working towards mitigating the problem. So again, the problem being this tension that exists between what patients need and want and availability of services. And so in our area in Ontario, Canada, when patients initiate their care or their services, whether they're right or wrong, when they initiate it, paramedics are almost obligated, as we heard yesterday, to take everyone to an emergency department. And so the question comes up, are we contributing to the problem of this access and need issue that I raised? And so obviously we're focusing in on the paramedic service, but not as an innovation to the paramedic service, but as an innovation to the healthcare system to see what can be offered there. So, and I should mention that this is a program of research, and what I'm sharing with you today is really just one phase of 5, phase 2 of 5. And so the idea is to eventually get to this program of eventually get to this place where there's some meaningful integration between these three systems here. And so really, we're just focusing at this point between the emergency department and paramedic services. So our research question was, given all that, we were asking, of patients transported to an ED by paramedic services following 911 activation or 999 or 000, whatever the emergency number is in your area, of patients transported to an ED by paramedic services, what is the course of clinical care disposition and most responsible diagnosis? Again, for those patients who activate the system themselves, 911 systems, that is. And then the second question was, what additional clinical services provided by paramedics in a 911 model or in an emergency care model would result in the greatest access, care, and intelligent transportation of patients encountered during emergent or urgent conditions? And so everyone in here in this room certainly understands that there are a number of low acuity calls that occur. I think we heard yesterday in one of the presentations 80 to 90% of the time. And so, but that is part of a 911 system. And so we want to think about what can we do for that 911 system that might improve this tension that we've been talking about. So another way to think about this is there's not just in paramedic services, but certainly elsewhere, they're talking about how can we shift services to improve capacity in the system, give the overall system capacity by shifting services, not necessarily only to paramedic services, but in a number of different places. And so another way to think about those research questions is to say, how can we shift services to address this tension? And so that's the gist of what we were looking for. And the goal is to eventually work towards that integration of those three systems, at least in Ontario for now. So the way we did this was, and again, I'm just sharing one part of the study. One of the ways we did this was a retrospective cross-sectional descriptive study and a model simulation. In other words, there were 2 phases. The first phase was to go through this retrospective cohort, or cross-sectional study, I should say. And then from there, introduce a number of models or simulations to see what would have the greatest impact on the system. These are predictions that we make, obviously, as a result of some existing data. So as I mentioned, program of research, and this is phase 2. So this study took place in York Region, paramedic services. It occupies about 1.2 million people. They service that many people. Mixed density of rural, urban, not quite remote, but still a mixed density of populations. It includes residential, commercial, and industry in that area. Mix of demographics, of course. Has 3 regional hospitals within its borders, but transports patients to hospitals outside of those borders. Employs about 487 paramedics at the time of this study. About 35% or so, I think, are at the advanced care paramedic level, and some of these 487 are part-time. They operate between 26 and 36 ambulances in a 24-hour period across 21 stations, and all their data is electronic, all their EPCRs. So as a brief overview of the study, the way it looks is we looked at all the patients who had contacted 911 in a particular date range. It turned out we used a year. Those who were transported within the boundaries of those 3 regional hospitals. We looked at all their EPCRs. We randomly selected 3,000 from there. We looked at some primary outcomes and then created a bunch of models. So in the patients that were transported, this is our inclusion-exclusion criteria. And so we were looking for residents, people who lived within the region, that's an REB issue, people who were over the age of 18. They must have contacted or engaged the system through a 911 phone call, so they called for emergency services that they felt was an emergency. They were transported to one of the regional hospitals, and we used patients who were CTAS 2, 3, 4, or 5, and so this eliminates people who are in cardiac arrest or extreme situations. And then we must have been able to match their record to hospital record, and then we eliminated anybody who was an interfacility transport or anybody who was bypassed. And in this particular region, there are a couple of bypass protocols like STEMI, for example. We stratified, or we took a sample of 3,000 patients, and from there we stratified based on the CTAS for the population. So you take all calls for the entire region for that year. You look at the distribution of CTAS. That creates your baseline, I guess, for how you're going to select your sample. So we did that by hospital and by CTAS overall. From those 3,000, we looked at a number of outcomes. For this particular phase 2, I'll just highlight some of them. So admission or disposition, their most responsible diagnosis, their interventions and diagnostics. And then there were 15 other categories with a number of subcategories, but I'm just reporting these here for now. You take all that information, once you pull all that out, you take all that information and you dump it into some models, and you can create endless number of models by which to test and look for predictions in terms of impact on the system. So the first way, in terms of analyzing all this, the first thing we did was create a classification system. That system is basically picks up on interventions, diagnostics, admission status, and most responsible diagnosis. You allow patients to fall into those categories based on that information. And then you explore their interventions and diagnostics by group, and then establish an index, and that index comes from their frequency, the frequency within that 3,000 patients in that year, and their association with discharge from emerge. You look at all that information together, and in the background, you're also exploring the most responsible diagnosis. And again, as a reminder, this is the idea, is we're trying to think about what can we shift, what kind of services can we shift, and what kind of pathways and communication can we have between these different organizations, these different settings, in order to improve capacity in the system. So as far as results, we whittled it down from 77 available records that met some inclusion criteria. After some cleaning, we eventually get down to the 3,000 randomized patients. We didn't have to do anything with the stratification, because pulling the 3,000 out randomly, as you would expect, aligns with the CTAS distribution in the same way, so we didn't have to do anything more. And of those 3,000 records, 1,660 had advanced care paramedics on that call. That'll become relevant here in a second. And this spanned across 23 communities in the region. I don't know the total off the top of my head, but that's a large span. So one of the things I'd like you to focus on is on this table, and this is specifically around groups 1, 2, 3, and 4. You'll notice that there are 10 categories, and this is a classification system only based on these variables. What you're not seeing here is the most responsible diagnosis, which is working in the background, and how it relates to ambulatory care sensitive conditions or not. So just based on that, you look at group 1, for example. So anybody who falls into group 1 would be people who didn't receive an intervention, didn't receive a diagnostic, and were not admitted. And then you can go down the list to group 2, which were interventions, none, diagnostics, yes, still not admitted. And so we believed, or argued, I guess, that I'd ask you to consider that those in the non-admitted group, that there's probably an opportunity there at least to consider some shifting of services, maybe, maybe not. And so we shouldn't assume that there is, but perhaps there might be. So these are the numbers. So you'll see there that 65% of the patients who call 911, call emergency services, get transported to emerge in this particular region. 65% of the time they never get admitted. So to us, that's like I said, just an opportunity for us to explore in terms of what can be done. And if you break that down a little further, you'll see that group 4 has 36% as the largest group, 36.4%. These are the patients that we would say are getting fixed in emerge. They're being taken to emerge, they're getting some additional diagnostics and interventions, they're being fixed and then sent home. And then again, there's a large group of information underneath that we don't need at this point. So from this point forward, we're just focusing in on that 1954, so that 1,954 patients, and that 65%. So you take all that information, and when we extracted the information, and in particular the most responsible diagnosis, we used the ICD codes, and those of you who are familiar with that, you'll know that they are very, very granular codes, very, very specific at times. And so to take all that information, when it's that specific, I think we came up with 472, I believe it was, different diagnoses. There's a group of researchers in the US that have come up with ways for the purposes of analysis and reporting to group these conditions, these ICD codes. So what you're seeing here are essentially the groupings. So the first one, for example, where it says other injuries, conditions due to external causes, it might be opened up to trauma or injury to numerous parts of the body, heat-related injuries, allergens, foreign bodies, MVCs, etc. So all I want you to know is that when you look at those patient lists, is that there's a list of more detailed, granular information in terms of what types of patients are being seen. The other thing to look at is where it says discharge out of 2,927 patients meant that 70 patients were excluded for some reason, and that's the index of discharge. In other words, and what you'll see there is that no one's at 100%. In other words, even in these patient types, these are the highest out of all the ones that we looked at, but even in these patient types, nothing is 100%, which means there's a degree of risk if you're going to target these patients. So some of these patients are getting fixed or treated and emerge, or at least some of these patients are getting admitted. And so you have to factor that in when you're trying to think of models that you're going to suggest for a service to consider. The index value on the far right is our simple ways of calculating the frequency of the event, the association with discharge. Put that together, it gives you some sort of index which you can rank. So when you look at the, I'll go through this one very quickly. When you look at the different patient types that we just looked at, then you can look at their group distribution. Basically what you can see there, just by looking at the bold and the pattern, is that the majority of these patients sit in group 4. In other words, they're getting fixed and emerged, treated, diagnostics, interventions, and released. So again, that suggests that there's a degree of risk that might come with trying to deal with these patients outside of that setting. So now when you start to create these models, and what I'm showing you here are 12 different models. I'm not, it's just, this could be 50 different models, and I'm just showing you 4 of them. And so the first one is this: if you looked purely at diagnostics, if you said what diagnostics are most frequent, most associated with discharge, most associated with those patient types that we just talked about, put all that together and say, okay, well, what diagnostics would we want to, or we think might be a reasonable strategy to put out to shift services. And so this is what you see, and when you put those diagnostics there, where it starts with CBC differential and all the way down, you see the percent change in number of patients to group 1. So you take all the patients that are spread off across those 4 groups, add these diagnostics to a system outside of, say, to a paramedic service as a model, and that shifts the number of patients that you can put into group 1, which potentially, because this is all simulated models, potentially may not need any additional services in an emerge. Now, the first pushback I always get when I say this, when we talk about this topic, is that you can't just give people diagnostics and expect them to work. And let me say that the caveat is, of course, that the diagnostics have to come with a degree of clinical reasoning. So it's not just purely diagnostics. But anyways, the percent change is significant. You can move up to 369% increase in the number of patients you move into group 1. If you do interventions, you'll see that the impact by according to interventions is not as great. It's only about, you're only essentially doubling it to some extent, and so the impact is not as strong, but still adds some information. And so there's a list of things that you can add in terms of shifting services that potentially, again, might result in some impact in the system in terms of capacity. When you combine the two, then you start to see the power of this whole thing. You see a change of 500%, over 500% or change from the initial values, from the baseline values, by introducing these diagnostics and interventions into a 911 system, into an emergency system. The important point to look at, too, is up at the top there where it says even the increase from simple baseline to increasing what would be included in our system, the advanced care paramedic scope of practice, just by factoring that in a little bit more, in other words, encouraging people to use it more and not transport patients or treat them outside, increases it by 35%, which tells you that there's a little bit of opportunity happening there. Take all that information and you look specifically at patient types now, and I'm only presenting 3 of them here. But if you look at all that information, you look at number 1, 2, and abdominal pain was number 4 or 5 in terms of ranking. You see that you can have a significant impact on patient type number 1, significant impact on patient type number 2, which is non-specific chest pains, but the abdo pains don't get affected by these models. In other words, the things that come out on top in terms of interventions and diagnostics don't affect this patient group in particular. So what that means is you can focus in on interventions and diagnostics, or you can focus in on patient types in terms of if you were trying to build a model or build a system to deal with this issue, you could target it in either way. You have both options. So again, the idea was, how can we have an impact on this issue of people who need services, an increasing need in services based on a growing and aging population, and availability of services. And the idea is, can you shift services? And that's what we were thinking. And so we were interested in whether or not we can put these services into a paramedic service model and then start to contribute to this integration, or begin to work towards this integration as a part of a program of study. So what we get from this portion of the data that I've shared with you is that at the very least there's opportunity here. And I think everyone knows that. I think everyone in this room certainly knows that. There's opportunity. And if you extrapolate that 65% to this particular region's population in terms of call volume, then you can potentially affect up to 35,000 patients. While that sounds impressive, it's hard to determine the accuracy of that number, so it might be an over or underestimation, we don't know. But you start to get a sense of how much you can affect the entire system. The other caveat I'll put in here is, now there's a degree of risk. When you introduce these interventions and diagnostics, or when you target this patient population more so than we're doing today, there's a degree of risk associated with that. Those values suggest that. So because they're not 100%, it's telling you that there's a degree of risk associated with that, although you can make judgment calls about how much risk is associated with that. It's just something that you have to consider going forward. And as I said earlier, interventions and diagnostics alone are insufficient, and so there's the caveat being that there's the appropriate degree of clinical reasoning that goes along with introducing these services in a model. The other thing we take away from this data, just looking at it quickly, and I know we've gone through that data very quickly, is that diagnostics matter most, it seems. It seems this rule-out idea, or this rule-out process, seems to have the biggest impact on what potentially could go into Group 1. In other words, not needing any additional services in eMERGE. And so interventions have less of an impact, but when you start to put that together, you start to really see the power of it. The only thing to consider is, as you add things, training costs and CMEs and so on start to go up as the complexity of the case becomes bigger. The other thing I just want to point out quickly is, when we were doing this work, we took off our never hat, if you will. We decided that there was just going to be no limitations in what would go on in terms of the interventions and diagnostics. If they made it to the top of the list, they went in. We did make some feasibility analyses to say what would be feasible, what wouldn't be feasible, and consider that in some of the models. But this really is aspirational in terms of looking forward and saying, where can we go potentially? The other thing is, patient types matter. So as I said earlier, some patient types are not affected by these interventions and diagnostics that sort of bubble to the top. And so you might want to focus there, or focus in on patient types specifically. For example, some have minimal impact, like abdo pain. Some are very significant. The other thing we notice is that there's a large number of patients that get transported who obviously don't need to be, and in our system there's somewhat of an obligation to do that, to transport these patients. So there's a cultural issue here that would be difficult to quantify, and so it might be something that we'll have to think about in terms of shifting that culture, that thinking of transporting everyone kind of thing. And as I mentioned earlier, the IRCP skill set alone can have a significant impact. Now in this particular study, there are of course some limitations. As I mentioned, it's an aspirational simulation type model. You can't predict these things with 100% certainty, and so please keep that in mind. And so it's isolated to one region. There are multiple models possible. All I showed you was 12. I spoke about 4, but there's 50 or 60 that we've gone through, and so these tend to be the ones that have the largest quote-unquote impact. As I mentioned, these are simulations, and we did have to consider to some extent the feasibility limitations that would be present in doing this type of work. So in conclusion, I would say, so far where we're at, and this is all preliminary data at this point, so far where we're at is that there is an opportunity. We believe that there is an opportunity, and that the consumption of healthcare, at least in this particular region, I would suspect this exists everywhere, is not expected to decline. It's expected to climb, obviously, And so the idea is, can we build capacity by shifting or adding services in the system through that model that's presented up there? So what can we shift to other settings? And we would argue that at the moment, based on what we're seeing so far, there's the potential at least for a very underserved population, at least in our system, when it comes to dealing with these types of events, these patient events in terms of contacting 911. All we've talked about is really that side of that triangle, the potential of integrating paramedic services more with emergency departments. And this is not necessarily, I'm not necessarily suggesting that you shift services entirely from emergency departments to pre-hospital settings, although that is part of what we are saying, that this interaction between these two departments is probably the best way to go. And so integrating services is very important. And that we would argue that we're contributing to the problem currently, and so at the very least we have to find ways of stopping that and not contributing any further and trying to mitigate this tension that I talked about earlier at a healthcare system level as opposed to just the paramedic service level, at least in our setting. The last thing I'll say is we didn't discuss any of the ambulatory care sensitive conditions, and so the other part of this analysis includes looking at all those most responsible diagnoses, looking at how they align with or not ambulatory care sensitive conditions, and whether or not we can work on the bottom part of that triangle with primary care and ambulatory care and see what can be managed there. And a lot of the work that you're doing that I heard yesterday targets that part there. You're working with ambulatory care and primary care to some extent in many different ways, but that targets that bottom part of the triangle, and this particular talk just talked about that side of the triangle up at the top between emergency service and paramedic services. I don't know how much time we have, but I'd really like you to push back on this. If you believe that there's something here that sounds crazy or inappropriate, we'd really like to get some pushback so that we can think more critically about what we're thinking about with this work. That's it. Thank you. Sorry? Okay. Yeah. All right.
And our next presenters are making their way up front, I think. Mary? Oh, getting ready. Okay. So we'll get Walter, that was incredible. We'll get Walter on a webinar. We'll do a whole hour session with a half hour of question and answer time afterward, sometime in the next couple of months on our regular third Monday of the month in the US and Canada at 4 o'clock Central Time, and give you a chance to engage him further. Our next two presenters, I have the pleasure of spending a lot of time with Mary Ehlers in the Paramedic Foundation. And she is a nurse who also happens to be a licensed community paramedic in Minnesota, although she's in Ohio. And Josephine Kershaw, who's a PhD, professor and associate dean of arts and sciences at Christ College of Nursing and Health Sciences. So welcome.
Good morning. So I'm Josephine Kershaw, and my colleague Mary and I will be presenting on building global educational pathways for enhancing the reach of community paramedicine. I'm the Associate Dean at Christ College of Nursing and Health Sciences in Cincinnati, Ohio. Just to give some background on our presentation, our report came across my desk that was published just this year called Envisioning the Future of Health Professional Education. It was put on by the National Academies Press and from a workshop from the Global Forum on Innovation in Health Professional Education. So I wanted to share some of the parties who were in that forum. So the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Nursing, the American Dental Educational Association, Council of Academic Physical Therapy. We have the Physician Assistant Education Association, Association of Colleges and Schools of Optometry, many educational associations. For the international component, they had Ghent University in Belgium, and another university in South Africa. They had the University in Uganda, Kingston University and St. George's University of London in England, as well as University in China. And from Canada, it was the University of Toronto that represented Canada and was on the planning committee to organize it. So I mentioned a lot of educational associations. There are actually 55 of them, and they also had sponsors from the foundations, Robert Wood Johnson, as well as some of the other foundations here that were represented that provided funding for health professions education. But what was missing? The paramedic profession, as well as the development of community paramedicine. So part of the presentation here is to talk about how community paramedicine and paramedics can be at this table that discusses the global the global development of health professions education and envisioning the future of health professional education. So from that workshop, a number of recommendations were put forth, and I'm just going to share 3 of them that pertain directly to our presentation. From the Lancet Commission report called Health Professionals for a New Century, the first one that I want to share is the recommendation to promote a new professionalism that uses competencies as the objective criterion for the classification of health professionals. The second one we've heard, to adopt locally but harness resources globally in a way that confers capacity to flexibly address local challenges. And then the last one, to link together through networks, alliances, and consortia between educational institutions worldwide. And this is a great meeting, an international meeting that is working towards that. So the educational aims of this presentation is to talk about enhancing the community paramedic profession through educational pathways. The purpose that the professionalization of community paramedicine would guide the formal education and curriculum requirements for those who aspire to enter the profession. So, profession, what a working definition for that is that it has a body of knowledge, it has ethical guidelines, and a professional organization that sets those standards and best practices. Another definition here is that a profession arises when any trade or occupation transforms itself through the development of formal qualification based in education, apprenticeships, examinations, the emergence of regulatory bodies for disciplining members, and some degree of monopoly rights to regulate who's entering the profession. So in the development of a profession, there were Purno-McGonigal proposed 3 models, the attribute model, power model, and process model. Go over those briefly. So the question is, which model should we look at? And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. And it depends on the maturity of the profession regarding which components of the models that would be used. Since these are already out there and other professions that have been recognized as professions globally as well as nationally, it would be good for us to look at the different components of what made them recognized as a profession. So the attribute model, it describes the traits, attributes, or characteristics that define a profession as different from other professions. What distinguishes community paramedicine as a profession, or as an occupation as different from others? So defining the standards of the profession, yesterday's presentations, some of those mentioned that there needs to be more definitions, and also to clearly demonstrate how the profession provides a service that's recognized as a social good. And particularly with our complex healthcare systems, what's that niche that community paramedicine would take? In the power model, this looks at different groups and organizations restricting the supply of services within one group that's less qualified and transfers the service to another group with appropriate skills and training. So again, the emphasis there on skills and training. And the last one is more detailed. It's a process model. In the first stage in the process model, it's that the occupation is identified. So the community of those who work within the profession, there's a critical mass that determines that this is now a profession we need to or become more organized. The second stage is the educational programs and training that are provided. And here the key event is that there's standardization so that people know that if you have these skills and qualifications, you are a community paramedic. The next one, the Professional Standards Association established, and the purpose of this is to develop those licensure and certifications that recognize those skills and qualifications. The fourth one, the Code of Ethics developed, and these are rules of the profession, and basically the teeth for the Code of Ethics is to provide sanctions. So if someone or an individual does not follow them, it provides disciplinary actions to basically kick them out of the profession until they are in compliance. The fifth one, societal support of the profession is recognized. And here we talked about the importance of sustainability, and that if there are policies that promote the profession and reimbursement of services, that the profession will be able to grow and become and prosper. So just briefly here, McConnell's model for the maturity of a profession. So we talked about community paramedicine as being up and rising. Again, education is very important to define those skills and qualifications. Accreditation is something else that needs to be considered. The process in which there's a certification of competency, authority, or credibility is presented as an independent body. Skills development, and here we have the application of the knowledge through clinicals and other experiential learning before the certification exam or licensure is granted. So certification is an exam in this model, like the CPA exam for accountants, that recognizes the accomplishment of that body of knowledge. Licensing, generally done by a governmental authority, to allow practice in that profession. And professional development, because the field is changing so rapidly in healthcare, and it allows for those in the profession to stay up to date. And the last two, professional societies, where there are groups of like-minded individuals, as here, who put professional standards above self-interest, both themselves and their employers. And the last one I mentioned is the Code of Ethics, those behavioral standards with sanctions for violations of the code. So with those models for a profession, I'm going to hand the mic over to Mary, who will talk more about and go into detail about how community paramedicine as a profession and to be recognized through global educational pathways can be done.
So as we embarked on this journey, the first thing we needed to do was come up with that working definition, and we looked at practices around the world to be able to determine key things. One, we needed a licensed professional. We needed an educational program that we needed that individual to demonstrate competence. We still wanted to operate with our autonomy under medical direction, and we needed to define the specific roles and services that we would provide to the community and within the healthcare system. We also needed to take a look at community paramedicine programs. So we wanted to know the most successful, because that was our drive, is to create that gold standard. We wanted to make sure we followed the community health needs assessment, that we were able to fill gaps, that we worked as an extension of that healthcare system, and our goal being improving community health. We wanted to parallel the international levels, starting with that primary care and up to that advanced provider. We wanted to determine key terms and titles that would be recognized both in the field and in healthcare professions. And we needed to recognize that going forward, we needed to continually educate our profession. So we started with the basic and the foundation of community paramedicine at the primary care level, as internationally known. And at this moment in time, we want to take this piece, and you're going to see in our next chart how we will articulate it up the spectrum. But this individual is that either that new paramedic may be coming out of an educational institution now that wants to kind of get their feet wet and learn about the community paramedicine piece, or it may be a 5 to 10 year experienced paramedic that does not want to go into all the invasive procedures, but does want to be in the community and does want to perform certain items and tasks. Moving forward, we have that intermediate level or that clinician level that would be more invasive with the skills. And then we advance to that practitioner or their baccalaureate degree, that we're able to actually design and modify those care plans for our patients in the field. And we want to move forward to the master's degree and ultimately down the road, of course, the doctorate degree. But we want to remain with that autonomy, and we want to establish our position so we're respected in the field. So to do that, we constructed the algorithm that would allow us not only to educate those in the field and the community, but those within the healthcare system, and to see where we could place certain individuals professionally and get the recognition that they deserve. And you can see in this level, I'm seeing my pointer works here. I don't know if it's working. In the bottom level in the certificate program, we currently have that EMT and that CPT. But you're going to recognize as we move forward with this program that we ultimately are placing them in the associates and the bachelors, that we're building that track, that we've placed the articulation in place. So if you come through the technician program, it will automatically be articulated into the clinician program, which then automatically will be placed within the bachelor's program. So as you come through and you gain credits, 4 credits in the technician, 14 credits in the clinician program, that those have the articulation agreement to be able to go forward in the bachelor's and the master's. Along those lines also, we've also built in that opportunity for certification. So at each level, if a community paramedic decides to maintain at the technician level and that's where they'd like to stay, then we offer that certification at that level. So as we go up in the career ladder, the certifications are in place to complete the programs. We want to make sure we have an understanding within the healthcare system as to where the community paramedic aligns, because that's real important in the education piece. So we used a real example to be able to educate with. We also wanted to give a detailed example as to those areas that could be meaningful for that community paramedic to actually physically work in the healthcare system, preventing those readmissions. To be able to actually work when they have that bachelor's or master's degree in care coordination within the healthcare system, to be able to really see that how from admission into the hospital you start that discharge planning process through that care coordination and that actual finish of the discharge planning process when they're being discharged from the facility. That's a huge piece for a community paramedic, because not only do they have that opportunity to see that patient incoming into the facility, but they also have the ability to coordinate with community paramedics in the field as that patient gets discharged. Along with that, they may also be housed in the specialty outreach programs that are by the hospital or the healthcare system, in those LVADs that leave our facilities. The people that have respiratory therapy on long-term ventilators, that go home with infusion requirements. All those pieces would be learned as that community paramedic as part of that, either that specialty outreach program or care coordination. And out in the community, we can have either those master's levels that are at that level, at that NP or that PA, but can remain with the autonomy that you have under medical direction. That's the important piece with each one of these levels. And obviously then plan for continuation and prevention.
To summarize, for the global pathways, you need those standard definitions of the community paramedic profession and coordinated educational curricula. This is my first IRCP, and meeting Mary and being drawn to this profession and her visionary ideas is a great inspiration for the College of Nursing. We're developing in the educational pathways in partnership with Hennepin Technical College and Mary, that associates going from the certificate to the associate's level, as well as the bachelor's level. So starting to work towards those coordinated educational curricula that provides credit for the training and the experience of community paramedics that will allow them to receive the associate's and the bachelor's degree. And then, as Mary said, hopefully in the future towards higher master's and doctorate degrees. So the professional association also is very important. Again, to have a seat at the table for these conversations towards the advancement of health profession education and the national and the global level. If it's all fragmented, it would be difficult for these policymakers to know who to invite. A quick example. So you have different sports organizations in the U.S. You have the NBA for basketball and the football associations and such. My daughter does baton twirling, and there's like 5 or 6 or 7 different associations for baton twirling, and it's not considered a sport for the Olympics, although it uses, the baton as well as gymnastics and dance and such, which are considered individual sports. They have very strong associations and leadership. When it's fragmented, it's difficult to be recognized and part of the conversation. So it's good to have that coordination here in the meeting that will be occurring tomorrow to try and have those standards and linkages, not just nationally, to have it internationally will be a really powerful voice. And also the licensure requirements that would be very good to be able to have the professionals not have to get recertified or relicensed when they go from one geographic area to another or from one state to another, and ideally, perhaps globally, to have that recognition of what a community paramedic is and the skills that are and qualifications that are involved. The code of ethics. I know that there's many codes of ethics out there for the different professions, but to have that for community paramedicine to really establish what are the expectations would be something that would be important. And accreditation processes. We've started meetings already as well with different parties that might be involved in the accreditation process. So accreditation would look at educational institutions. So we have the Higher Learning Commission for the Christ College of Nursing and Health Sciences. We have an accreditation site visit on our associates and bachelor's programs that I'd mentioned that would have community paramedicine as a specialty track. So education institutions would have accreditation processes. Individual community paramedic programs would have accreditation processes to make sure that the equipment's in place, that there are sufficiently qualified staff in the facility, and providers in that program. And then you would also have accreditation for the providers and the educational program that would be in place. And the third one would be certification, board certification for graduates of these programs. And we're also starting conversations for that. So there's multiple angles to ensure quality and recognition of the skills and qualifications for community paramedicine that are part of the developing conversation to make sure that these are coordinated and allow that more unified voice. So that would contribute to the legal recognition, so that with that, the laws and the policies that are passed to promote reimbursement and sustainability of the profession, so that those who graduate from the educational programs are able to find careers and pathways that will be viable and sustainable. And here the community paramedic curriculum going from the technician with the associate's level, the clinician with the bachelor's level, the practitioner did I say
And
those
the
right, Mary?
advanced.
And the advanced community paramedic at the master's level. So this providing a career pathway that allows someone who's interested in the field and those who are already in the field a progression that will go forward into the future.
Let's see if
So references there.
we just want to let you know that we didn't do this alone, that we had representation across the country, and it's been a very exciting process. And we look forward to tomorrow and taking this globally and having that opportunity. Any questions? We'll be here. Is it okay?
So there are the two of the people in the States that make us all look good. Thank you, ladies, for doing that. And I have lost my place because I'm posting presentations in the back. Here we go. Sherry and team. So once again, we have the team from Saskatchewan, and you guys have been great. You got a lot of stuff going on, and we're glad you got multiple presentations in this session. And I'm going to let Sherry introduce her team. Oh yeah, we need just a couple of minutes to change headsets, so we'll start very shortly.
So while they're getting prepared and getting their headsets on, I'll do a quick introduction of the team and the project from Saskatoon. So our discussion today is on community paramedicine in Saskatoon Health Region within the city of Saskatoon. And Saskatoon Health Region, MD Ambulance, and community stakeholders have engaged in a number of community paramedicine initiatives. And so this program will go through those community paramedicine initiatives that are within the city and are flourishing. So our panel, Andrew Williamson, he is the Deputy Chief of Operations for MD Ambulance. Anita Bergen is Manager of Seniors Health and Continuing Care for Saskatoon Health Region. And Pat Stevenson is Executive Director of Stonebridge Crossing Retirement Community. It's a personal care home. And Farron Nakaska is an advanced care paramedic with the Saskatoon Pilot Community Paramedicine Program, and he's from MD Ambulance. So we'll let Andrew get started.
Good morning. Oh, look at that. We've already gone 2 slides into the presentation. That's excellent. My goal today is to give everybody kind of an overview of what I consider to be our portfolio of community paramedicine. At MD Ambulance, we've been fortunate enough to have more than a couple different avenues of where we've taken our paramedicine pilot, and I'm quite happy to share that with you today. So the slide prior to this just showed a partnership slide, and what I found and what we found, I think, most important is that EMS by nature, we're very quick. Obviously, we're very quick to respond. We're very quick to turn on a dime and answer any questions or move on any new initiatives. I think what we had to learn as an industry, or certainly as a local, is to learn to slow down, to learn to be collaborative, have good discussions with our stakeholders. Someone told me at one point that you either lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way. And I think that we found that we can lead, but we have to make sure we do it in a way that's respectful and in collaboration with others. So that was a big learning lesson for us, specifically at our company. We did that by having discussions with our regulation bodies, with our nursing unions, with public health, indeed with our doctors, directors of care, and with our patients as well. So the health bus as one one of our pieces of our portfolio has been discussed at the International Roundtable in the past, and some of you may be familiar with the model or had an opportunity to see it as it was parked out front with the Chiefs Conference on Wednesday and Thursday. But it's quite a dynamic piece of our model. For one thing, in Saskatoon, we have temperatures that range from plus 40 to minus 40, and that's Celsius. And for anybody who needs that in Fahrenheit, that's minus 40 to 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, a bus full of water and people running at minus 40 certainly creates some challenges. I mean, the water lines tend to freeze at minus 30, and the generator is required to run the entire 9.5-hour shift that it's on site to provide air conditioning in the summertime. So we do have some challenges to that. The good news is at minus 30, we don't have many wait lines. The ED waits at the bus is pretty much non-existent. Someone told me once that form will follow function. So the function of the health bus was to provide high quality, low acuity primary health care in the community of Saskatoon. Saskatoon stakeholders identified the aim as to create health equity and close the disparity gap for those who are geographically, socially, and economically or culturally isolated. So we do that by having the forum, which promotes health, promotion, and education. We do assessments and wound care, immunizations, prescriptions and referrals, and follow-up care, as well as chronic disease management. One of the interesting things we found about staffing the health bus with primary care paramedics is that the paramedic by nature really wants to be a doer, and on the health bus specifically, they're much more of a team member, and we had to find a way to find something that would engage them or give them a hook into the program. So in work with public health and with the region, we took on flu vaccine as a part of the health bus, and made that primary care paramedic the lead provider of the flu vaccine on that bus, and it really gave them an insight or an ownership to the bus, and we've really seen a good uptake with the paramedics doing that. The health bus parks in part of our population, which is socioeconomically quite challenged. If we were to overlay a map of this with our socioeconomic map, you would see that it is quite identical. These are the areas of clients by neighborhood within our region, and the health bus parks at a different place each day of the week within this region, although the same place each day of the week, if that makes sense. So every Monday it's at this corner, every Tuesday it's at this corner, every Wednesday it's at this corner, and it repeats itself. So they become very predictable of where they're at, and the clientele gets to rely on seeing the bus there every day. What we'd see for the bus is going forward is that we look to enhance the safety, but yet maintaining the non-judgmental and approachable venue that's there. Because it does park in some neighborhoods that are a little bit on the rougher side, sometimes we have to keep that in mind, and because we're in a bus that only has one point of exit and one point of entry, that creates a dynamic. So we've done some things with our hospital security staff that'll drop by and do just random drop-ins and checks, and the staff do have windows all over so they can see the people approaching, and keeping that in mind. But we haven't gone to the model of putting the uniforms back on. So our health bus staff are much like many of you today in a golf shirt and slacks, and we try not to have a non-approachable manner by throwing on the uniform. Obviously, we look to develop an enhanced model for our maintenance days. So when that generator breaks or those water lines freeze, we have to have downtime. And we look to keep our eyes open for a rural equivalent to this health bus, because at this time we only have one and it only functions within the city. Police detention is another model within our portfolio. And our paramedic program pilot initiated in July of 2011. We're still there today. It's shown great success. We were there originally only on night shifts between 1800 and 06 o'clock in the morning. But everybody who comes in, we believe them to be a detainee, not a patient. Okay, so every assessment that is done in city police as a baseline assessment. Where are they right now? Part of the biggest model, or the challenges to the model, is the uniform is worn in police, and while we're black uniform and city police is a dark navy uniform, is identifying with the person that comes in that the questions that are being asked by the paramedic are for a non-policing matter. So while the booking sergeant certainly asks some risk stratification questions at the desk, you know, have you taken anything tonight? Are you on any drugs? Those questions will be repeated by the paramedic, but there's really needs to be that identification that we're asking these for a non-policing matter. We're here for your well-being should something happen. And then depending on the answers that they get, the paramedic will determine whether simply sticking with a visual and verbal assessment is appropriate, or whether they should go on into a hands-on assessment, which would include vital signs and perhaps a blood glucose testing included. So in 2015, you just see the numbers there of who we assessed and who we saw, and the YO is identified as the young offenders who were also in the department. Just as a quick comparison on nights, I'm colorblind, so I'm going to throw that out there as my disclaimer. So the bar to the left of of each of those graphs are the transports that we did on night shifts prior to the pilot, and the bar on the right-hand side of each of those graphs is the number of transports we did out of city police cells after the pilot has come on. In comparison, again, we were only there on nights, not days, so you see the transports from the department on days have stayed consistent, where the transports on nights have dropped off significantly. So just recently we've been told and given the funding to go forward and implement city police on a 24/7 model. We're quite excited about that. City police is very relieved that we'll be there for that model and offer that support to their staff. We recently just orientated 11 more staff to that site to allow that model to occur, and literally you saw the sergeant's shoulders relax with that news being shared that as of July 1 we'll go 24/7. Again, if the police are assessing somebody out in the field and they're concerned, we tell them, bring them in and let the paramedic have a look at them in detention, and at that point they can be determined whether they would stay or go. The Lighthouse is another one of our models. This is a 120-bed facility, non-for-profit housing that offers an emergency shelter, supportive living, as well as affordable housing. Many of the people in the Lighthouse have physical and cognitive disabilities, and many are overcoming disabilities, or addictions rather. With our program, we saw that, of course, many of us were experiencing offload delays in the emergency department, upwards of 160 hours per week when we did the study. EMS was making on average around 35 calls a month to the facility. Interestingly, however, after the implementation of having the community paramedic holding an office in the department or in the building from 1,100 hours until 2,300 hours, and in the month of December, when I indicated we can certainly have 40 below nights, we saw the number drop to below 20 visits in a month, and in fact only 5 transports. So these were significant numbers for the Lighthouse. So then on to our, what we refer to formally as our community paramedic, and again, we thank the health region for the partnership that we have there. We proposed the community paramedic program to be something that would further decrease our emergency visits. It was part of a 14-day challenge that was announced by the CEO of the health region. We looked specifically in the pre-work at our long-term care transports, around 1,240 in a year, with a greater than 50% admission rate and an average length of stay of 13 days. Significant costs, significant contributor to the offloads and the non-vacancy in our ERs. So in April of 2015, we launched, starting with 2 long-term care sites. The paramedics engaged in a 5-week orientation period, focusing a lot on gerontology and the geriatric assessment. We were operating 7 days a week, and we've seen 745 visits in that time. Over that time, we've achieved an ER avoidance of our visits of over 85%, which is significant. 633 less emerge visits as a result. And we talk specifically about ER avoidance in this slide as opposed to cost savings, in that we know an ER visit is in the neighborhood of $300 a visit, and I'm speaking specifically to those who don't visit emerge and not to those who ultimately may be admitted for a significantly higher cost. And I think, Sherry, in your presentation yesterday, you spoke to a number in the millions, which would be the extrapolation of this figure. And those are our 5 community paramedics, one of which I'm honored to share the stage with today, Farron. These paramedics were given the opportunity to self-select. We held an information session, and the paramedics in our company came in and heard what the pilot was going to be about, and determined for themselves whether this was something that they wanted to play a part in. And we've had a great success, great buy-in with these 5 staff. It's a very easy portfolio to manage because these guys want to see it succeed, and they take it forward on their own. So, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you, Andrew. So Anita will take over, and she will talk about specifically the community paramedicine pilot for the long-term care areas. She is our go-to guru for the Saskatoon Health Region in the Seniors Health and Continuing Care area. So every time we have a question about long-term care and their policies and procedures, she's our person. So thank you for joining us. Anita, while you guys are fixing that, I have to tell you a story. I was at SEMSA one time, and those of you that were at SEMSA, there was a couple nurses on a panel like this, and neither are a nurse and a doctor, and I happened to be the nurse, and it was the paramedics that had to fix our mics. So this is kind of embarrassing as the paramedic is fixing the nurse's mic right now.
It's all good. I'm just going to do this if that's okay, and then we'll all be good. Yep. So as Andrew was saying, the 14-day challenge ended in the community paramedicine pilot being in long-term care. So our group was tasked with getting the pilot actually up and running. So what did that take? Well, of course, it took a lot of pre-meetings to get everybody on the same page, to know what we were actually doing and where we were going to go. And we identified really early on that we really needed to engage the nurses union, because we knew that along the way that nurses in long-term care would be the ones most affected by this change in process. And we wanted to make sure that we had the union on board so that we could, guarantee success. And the time invested with the union was not insubstantial, but I think it was time really well spent. So our first task, of course, was to choose the homes. So how did we do that? Well, first of all, we had 4 criteria that we used. And the first criteria was, was the home ready and willing to participate in the pilot? We wanted the home to be excited about what possibilities were with this pilot, and we wanted the homes to anticipate success. So that was our first criteria. The second then was leadership capacity in the home. We know that leaders in long-term care homes have lots of conflicting priorities, and they're very, very busy people. And we knew that this pilot would take some time to physically be at meetings, but also to schedule and to make sure that and then all the rollout plans, that kind of thing. We needed the leaders to be on board as well. So that was another criteria. The third criteria was that of geographic location. And the city of Saskatoon is not a particularly large city, but we did want the homes geographically located in different locations so that we could start factoring in travel time for the community paramedics as part of the pilot. And the final criteria was simple volume of transfers of residents to the emergency room in the past year. And our department had been tracking it for 12 months, so we knew exactly which homes had utilized those services more. And so we kind of put all those criteria together, and we determined that our first 2 pilot sites would be Luther Care Communities and Porteous Lodge, representing approximately 230 residents. Our second task then was to determine a process. What are we going to do to get those paramedics actually in the buildings? So we used a lean tool called value stream mapping. And what we did is we got leaders from the homes, nurses, we had our entire group get together and join in the task, and we had big pieces of paper all over the wall, and we identified the experience of a resident from the first time the resident is identified as being ill and all the steps in between to the point where the resident is actually or the paramedics are called and transported the resident to the hospital. And then what we did was we identified gaps. What were the things that were missing in this process, and how could a community paramedic pilot identify those gaps, hopefully so the result would be that the resident was able to be treated right in the home and transport would be avoided. So through that process, we developed a process and of what potentially could work. So then we needed to develop the tools so that everyone would know exactly what was going on and we would all be on the same page to ensure good communication by all team members. So this was another fun time of developing pamphlets, letters to families, letters to physicians, work standards, as well as posters for staff, residents, and families. So on April 13th, 2015, we were ready to go. So on that very first day, Angela was on and she went to both of the homes and she went to their nurse's report, introduced herself, and then introduced the program and said, hey, we're going live, call me if you need me. And within the first week, this is one of our experiences. Sorry, I think it's right here.
So this is a little bit different that one was set up. It's just a... Sorry, you can go ahead while Anne comes up.
So one thing, again, that really made this pilot a success early on is the fact that we really engaged 4 stakeholders in every interaction, every time. And those stakeholders are the resident and family, the physician, the nurse, the community paramedic, always together every time, making the decisions. And with that, any of the stakeholders
This past week, my husband had a medical concern at Luther Care Home, and we were able to have the expertise of paramedic come out and assess him quickly. She arrived with a marvelous number of equipment pieces in a nice tidy bag. She was able to assess his situation with blood work test that was coming back from the day before. And she was able to equip him with an IV drip, which made it possible for him to move from going to the dining room at breakfast in a wheelchair to walking to the dining room at supper on his own with his walker. The whole experience was excellent.
As you can see, this was a huge success story really early on. And again, one of the successes is that the 4 stakeholders were part of every decision. And at any time, any of the 4 stakeholders can stop the line and say, hey, you know what, this isn't working for me, I really choose not to, can we not go ahead with this process of involving a community paramedic? So everyone's voice is heard, everyone's opinion really matters, and with that very collaborative, very respectful approach, and it's worked really well. So early on, senior leadership at Saskatoon Health Region really liked what was going on, and they wanted us to expand, and they wanted us to expand pretty darn quickly. So again, we needed to choose 2 additional homes to add to the pilot, and they were again chosen based on the criteria that I mentioned earlier. So we met with Sherbrooke and Central Haven, and we met with their leadership, we met with their nurses, and a bit of a smaller group. And then we brought that huge piece of paper that we developed with the initial homes, and we showed it to them and said, hey, does this process resonate with you? Is there anything missing? And we were pleasantly surprised to learn that for the most part, a little bit of tweaking was required, but really the process resonated with those 2 new homes. And they really thought it really validated everything that we had done before. So we went over the materials as well, and we had to tweak, and Erica and we were typing away and doing different things so that every tool that was developed would be right for those homes. We arranged for the community paramedics to rotate through to come say hello, introduce themselves, so the staff and the residents became familiar with the faces of the community paramedics. And a go-live date was chosen. So on June 10th, the program was expanded to Sherbrooke and Central Haven. And that was such a success early on that we were asked to expand again. So on July 16th, the program moved into Oliver Lodge. And they told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends. And a year later, we have now expanded to all the long-term care homes in Saskatoon except for 1, and that is by their choice. So now the long-term care community paramedicine pilot is in 13 long-term care homes, and it provides service to almost 1,500 residents. So any pilot project has its challenges and its successes. So early on, probably one of the larger challenges was actually buy-in from nurses. We're a really, really tough bunch, and we have been known to eat our own, so this was no different. They weren't exactly sure how the community paramedics would function as part of their team. Up until that point, their experience with advanced care paramedics was, well, we would call you when we really need you to come, transport a resident to hospital. And when you come through our doors, we hand the care over to you, and then you do what you need to do and you remove the resident to the hospital like we've asked you to do. And that's kind of the relationship that had always taken place up until then. Well, now we're inviting you into our home as a team player, but we've never been a team player with you before. So nurses were a little skeptical as to who would do what, who would be responsible, who would do the charting, who would do the reporting, and actually who was in control. We're control freaks. So that was one of the challenges. The hours was certainly another challenge. Well, if anyone here has ever worked or been in long-term care, everything doesn't happen neatly between 6:30 in the morning and 6:30 in the evening. So there was some calls of people really, really wanting the hours to be expanded really quickly, and we're still working on that part. Another challenge was misunderstanding over what the scope of the community paramedics really was. So of course, in the first week, literally, they were called upon to provide phlebotomy services as well as x-ray services. And unfortunately, the homes had to be told, sorry, we don't do that stuff yet, because pretty quickly on, phlebotomy did become part of their scope of practice, and the homes are ecstatic that now they can call the community paramedics for stat blood work. It's worked really well. But there were also some really, really early successes as well. And word really spread amongst the homes. And Marion's story went on, onto the Saskatoon Health Region website, and people started talking. The leaders of the homes meet every month, and they talk about what the great things are going on in their home, and this was front and center. So homes became fairly excited, about joining the pilot as the year progressed. Another huge success was the people that were chosen or that signed up for the community paramedic pilot. They're all exceptional individuals. They have a great spirit amongst them. They're real team players. They love to collaborate and are very respectful. Really great people that we were able to work with. Another real success was that the community paramedics, part of their standard work is to return the next day and just check up on the residents that they were providing service or part of the team the day before, just to make sure that the intervention really was successful. And this has really promoted trust with the residents, families, and staff that the paramedics don't just parachute in and parachute out, but they're there to follow up to make sure that what they participated in really was a success. Another success was the standard work documents that we were developing, that we changed them the moment we heard something wasn't working, that there was a glitch. We changed them immediately, and homes really got to trust the process, that we were listening and we wanted the process to work. And finally, our final success, I would say, is that we really do value the 4 stakeholders. Everyone's voice is really important, and everyone has power to change the situation if they choose. So it's really been very respectful and very collaborative.
Thank you, Anita. So we're very privileged to have Pat here. Pat is one of the 4 personal care homes that's included in this pilot. And she has been a voice for the community paramedicine program and an advocate and a champion. So thank you so much for joining us, Pat, and we'll let you take it away.
Okay, is mine working? Yeah? Okay. I was just asked to talk a little bit about how the program impacted our facility. And I thought I would just divide it into 4 sections. And the first thing is, how does it impact the resident? Our residents, obviously, they're all elderly. There's transitional things that have happened in their lives, and they've also got medical issues that they're having to learn how to live with. And so we have a lot of fear. We have a lot of questions about what value is my life now that I'm living in a personal care home, and I don't do the things that I used to do. So when we started the program, one of the things that I wanted to change in our home is the fact that every time there's something small going on or a change in the medical condition, that these folks don't always have to go to hospital. And so with these folks coming in, what we saw was that they were very respectful of the residents. They really got it. They got down to the residents' level, and they were able to ask them for their opinion about what their health problem is at that time. And one of the things with the elderly is they have the right to express their own opinion and what it is that they're seeing within their own health. And these folks have certainly been very respectful of that. It gives the residents confidence that actually the community doesn't care about them, and that when these folks come in, they know that they're in hands of very confident folks, and it makes them feel really good about it. The families, they're very pleased that they don't have to, their family doesn't have to go to hospital. None of them want to go to hospital. They all want to stay at our facility. And one of the things that we do work with the families and the residents in order for them not to have to move again. We do lots of care planning and all the rest of it to make sure that they don't have to leave. And in one situation, we had a family who was at end-of-life care, and the family was with the residents. We had spent a lot of time with them, and all of a sudden an ambulance was called from that suite. And so I went running up, and actually the folks were already there, and the advanced paramedic was there. And I sat with the family and I said, what is it that you think you're going to get at hospital for your mother at this point that we're not doing here? And what they were frightened of is that actually her respirations had changed, because that's what happens when you get to that point in your journey. And these folks were outside, and they really helped me explain to the family that in actual fact this was quite a normal process, and that they could, their parent could stay with us, and she did until she passed away. So that alone in our building really built up the confidence that we had with them supporting and becoming part of our team. Our staff, we're out there on an island sometimes. We are a private facility. We don't have a lot of support systems. And we have some very young nurses in there. And when these guys come in with their confidence and the way that they teach our staff, it's such a bonus, because our staff are building confidence in some of their assessment skills and some of their decision making regarding the care of the elderly. And it's been a real big help to our staff, and we've quite enjoyed having them there. And how has it helped out in the community? We have a very good reputation in the community. People know that we're there to help these residents. We want to reduce trips to the hospital, and these folks have certainly helped us achieve that goal. And we have seen a significant decrease in the number of residents from our facility going to the hospital. And it's been a real pleasure to have these folks as part of our team and part of our decision making.
Thank you, Pat. Farron? Farron thought we were going to take so much time he wouldn't get time to talk, so the stage is yours for the next.
Well, sorry, I don't know I have much to say. They pretty much covered everything I was going to touch on. Overall, the program has really taken off, and it's been a real team effort. It's been a real team response. I know Elise, who's sitting in the back of the room there, she's on the team as well. She's been hounding the directors for quite some time as to when we're going to get a community paramedic program. Come on, let's get going. We're behind the 8 ball here. So when it was suggested, or not suggested, when it was announced that our community paramedic program was going to launch in long-term care, she jumped all over that, and a number of others of us did as well, because we see that's where EMS is heading towards. And the opportunity to launch our program with long-term care was that launching point. The team dynamic, I would say, is next to none. We are constantly informing one another of our clients, of our residents. There's those ones where, you know, when we first go in, it's like, okay, this one we're going to have to watch closely over time. And there's a constant update, and we're going in and we're visiting, we're talking with the resident, we're talking with their family, we're talking with the care staff, and we're just, it's just a constant monitoring, and it's been a fantastic team effort. Again, the success of the program, I can actually think of two cases that really allowed us to progress as quickly as we did. The first one was where Anita talked about, where that gentleman was sick and just with a little bit of fluid and monitoring, by day's end, he was back to his normal self. The second one was at the other partner site, where it was a lady who was terminal cancer, bone cancer, and she would roll over in bed and break a bone. And I believe she actually had a fall out of bed and ended up fracturing her femur. But she was quite adamant that she was not going in. And so Bob was the attendant that day, went in, and he formulated a plan with the care staff and with the resident. And as a result, he actually went out of his way. He's talked to orthopedics. He got some guidelines and went out, got a Zimmer splint, splinted that lady, and then unfortunately about 4 days later she passed away. But we don't view that as a fail. We actually view that as a win, because she was able to stay at home and slip away in her familiar environment, instead of the chaos that she would have experienced of being transported to an emergency department. So those two events, I think, spread word rather quickly, because the staff at these care homes actually work at multiple care homes. So when they see these events, they talk to the other staff members at the other sites. So when we went into the other sites, I think the buy-in was higher versus the first two sites. And actually, it's one of the biggest voices against us going into one of the homes. She is now one of our biggest advocates of the program. So that alone was a big win as well. In our short 13 months, as Anita said, we have expanded to 13 long-term care sites, 4 personal care homes, and 3 of those are actually independent senior towers that have nursing availability within them. And just those alone, we're covering 1,895 beds. On top of that, we formed a partnership with palliative care, where we've been asked to go in and provide fluid resuscitation, some pain control, nausea, vomiting to those individuals as well, without having to send them off to the emergency department. We formed a partnership with a group home company that deals with mental and physical disabilities, and that group home has 13 sites, ranging from 4 beds to 20 bed sites. And we have recently started talks with forming a partnership with the Saskatchewan Cancer Agency and providing in-home services to their clientele. Because as we all know, the last place you want a chemo patient is in the cesspool of an emergency department. So it's been fantastic. Our expanded scope of services has been great. Being able to provide phlebotomy. The care staff are just ecstatic about that. And as of the beginning of May, we've been able to go ahead and provide first dose antibiotics outside of acute care. And I think there's a lot of people all over doing backflips for that service as well. We've been approached by all levels. All our stakeholders have been happy that they now have the option of not having to go into the hospital, that they can receive services within their home. And we've actually received a lot of interest from other practitioners in our service as to, okay, when are you guys going to expand? When can we get in on this? Because they see the difference that we're making within the community itself. Has it made an impact on the emergency departments? I think it depends on your point of view. But overall, in the community, it definitely has. Now, the nice thing is that now that we've well established in long-term care, now our next launching point is going to be into the community. So hopefully, once we form an agreement with this cancer agency, that'll be our launch point in the community, and we'll just snowball from there. And that's my experience.
Thank you, Farron. Gary, I know that most of this panel is leaving, and they won't, pardon me, they won't be available on breaks. So I'm wondering if we want to take a minute just to ask them questions, if you have any, because otherwise they will be gone.
Well, hearing about other programs, they're going out and they're working with those individuals. I'll use a diabetic as an example. So going out and working with those clients, ensuring that, they're monitoring their sugars, that they're looking after their insulin control, even their diet. So, we have to form other partnerships with dietary services and home care and just, again, working with those individuals where, from a transport point of view, when they call us because of their situation, where we go in and it's like, man, I wish we didn't have to take you in. Is there something that we could do for you here and now? So working with those individuals.
I think also fair and ad hocly, we tried to identify a couple of our super users early on, and to make the program financially viable, I think the region looks at an average of 3 calls per day, or some in that neighborhood where we create 3 ER avoidances per day. And selfishly, as an entity, MD Ambulance was looking at some of our super users, identifying that we had one gentleman who was calling us, as I'm sure many of you can identify with, not only numerous times per week, but sometimes numerous times per day. And we were having the community paramedic go out and visit that person's residence routinely at a specific set time where we identified that typically his calls come within that window of time, and do a drop-by on our timeline as opposed to him calling us on our timeline, on his timeline rather, when we're inundated with calls and offload delays. So we would try and allow him to have that impact and very low needs as far as ER assessments or definitive care that was being done, but he always wanted to go in, he always wanted to be transported, and then typically left without any interventional care. So I think that's yet a vessel that we'll pursue further.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, panel.
I got to meet Sherry several years ago when the health minister here had a planning group. And the planning group ended, but it's nice to see that the work didn't, and to have the hometown agencies for our program be able to make some really great progress. Our next presenter is Duncan McConnell. I found out this morning that he's a singer. So I've asked him to sing. He said no, but if you encourage him, maybe he will. We first met Duncan last year when he was working on a project to bring a simulator into the classroom. And then he did a webinar for us earlier this year when they were actually constructing the simulator in the classroom. And now I think it's fully operational, so we're interested to hear about that progress. So Duncan, thank you very much.
Yeah, you muted me. I was on mute. There we go. I'm all good now. That's all right. Well, thanks for having me over here in Saskatoon. Yes, as Gary was saying, last IRCP, for those that came to Melbourne, discussed some of the potential ways that we could reinvent the way we could look at simulation, virtual technologies and things like that to help develop and change the way that we approach paramedical education. So, a little bit about me and the degree that we're doing at the moment. I've been in ambulance now for 20 years. This is my 20th year. Over the past 20 years, I've completed a few things to sort of redevelop the way that manage staff, work within education and develop other avenues like that. I'm an advanced care paramedic, still work casually with the Queensland Ambulance Service, but now full-time with Griffith University in their School of Medicine, which is based down on the Gold Coast. So for any of you that might be going to the Commonwealth Games in 2018, Griffith is one of the major sponsors associated with the 2018 Games, and many of our paramedic students that we've got within this first cohort will actually be part of the medical team that'll be wandering around the the Commonwealth Games Village and other avenues like that, which is quite a big opportunity for them that they can add into their resumes for when they apply for their jobs. Research interests, obviously simulation is my key area, but we've also got a bit of another research in CPR, community-based CPR, increasing knowledge and things like that within our actual Gold Coast area. So maybe with the next IRCP we might bring the other associate professor associated with that in to talk about ways that they've improved some of those within our university-based hospital. The actual Bachelor of Paramedicine, I'm actually quite excited about Sunday's international discussion that we're going to have, because our degree in Australia is actually the newest paramedic degree that is currently in place. We have a 2.5-year accelerated program. We have CAP students, and there is another degree in Australia, they're in Latrobe. I believe Peter is here as well. He has CAP student numbers as well. We're focused on smaller numbers to deliver a more intense program to develop a higher level of understanding and skill for the students that go through. My personal view is trying to push through 200 students at a time doesn't produce the quality that you're looking for with your applicants when they graduate. Our tutorial sizes alone are 8 to 10 students per tutorial group, compared to some of the larger universities that push through up to 30 students. So what we can achieve in those 8 to 10 students, particularly with the technology I'm going to talk about today, is very hard to try and replicate when you've got large numbers of people that you're trying to push through. We have multiple areas of placement, not just with paramedicine. We also, because we're linked with a university hospital, we have the ability to actually provide hands-on training like we used to receive when I went through 20 years ago in emergency rooms, a theatre, day surgery, putting LMAs and tubes in real patients, cannulating real patients, learning how to communicate with real patients, not just dummies. So providing a nice, rounded lot of experience before they actually get started on the road in paramedic world. And we also have some exclusion points. What that means is that throughout the degree, if they fail to achieve certain key indicators, then they'll be excluded from the degree. So if they fail their paramedical placement, or they fail the communication course that we run, which is a medical school level communication course, the students will actually be, first they can appeal obviously, but if they fail that appeal, they'll actually be excluded from that degree. Feedback that we have got from industry is that when students don't do well in certain areas, particularly on placement, be it wrong attitude, haven't got a clue what they're doing, industry thought, well, that's all right, we'll just pass them because they come to placement and the university can sort them out. Unfortunately, in a university setting, we work on how students go academically. So if students are passing academically, we have to push them through. Now, as a working paramedic, I always look at the person I'm working with or assessing, would I have them treat me or treat my family? So pushing back to industry, we've sort of gone through the approach, if you don't think they're suitable, let us know. Because giving them back to us and saying they're suitable if they're not, doesn't help the cause for when they graduate. So it's sort of a different approach that we've taken with our students. The other key point from an Australian perspective is we actually graduate in the mid-year. So most of the other degrees graduate at the end of the year, and what we've found in industry is most of the vacancies happen in the middle of the year. Now there's quite a few thousand ambulance graduates that come out every year now. So if you graduate in that big cohort group that comes out at the end of every year, chances of employment aren't as high as if you graduate in the middle of the year when there's more opportunities and less people going for them. Okay, so challenges. Well, over the years I worked within education as well, within Queensland Ambulance, and we looked at different ways we could approach simulation. One technique that we tried, I worked at one of the big training centres in Queensland, and we had areas where we would look at utilising an ambulance. We had that set up with various cameras and things inside of it, which we could reverse into an emergency department, and then that scenario could then transfer over to medical students, nursing students to do their assessment, and then move on from there. And we thought that was quite good, but it was very time consuming and very costly, and particularly trying to make everyone link up together. So we looked at ways that we could actually get that environment more sort of closely related to how they operate when they're on road. So it's all very well sitting in a classroom, having a stretcher that's sort of attached to a table. You practice pulling it in and out and practice doing different observations and things like that. but what's it like actually applying your base level techniques or your advanced techniques in those confined environments? How do you readjust yourself when you're trying to actually do cannulation and the only arm you can get to is actually the one that's pinned to the side of the ambulance? Or how do you do CPR in a moving vehicle? Retrieval services, for example, and this is where we're working closely with our university hospital across the road. Nurses and doctors, they do a fabulous job in what they're actually doing in resuscitation and trauma rooms and things like that. But what about if we take them and throw them in the back of an ambulance? Okay, now do the same technique that you would do in a very big resuscitation room, and now you've got this tiny little 3 metre by 2 metre space. I'm not sure what that is in feet terms, sorry. And see how they respond with that. And not only have they got that tiny space, they've got a chair that's in the way. They've got the other aspects that just, it's not the same, okay? So this type of ability actually works quite well. And that's the modular design, which is great, okay? You've got a modular design, it represents the space and things like that. But how do you actually then change from modular to actually movement? And that's where this particular technology has come in. Not only have we've taken that modular design, but we've set it up in such a way that it will actually make it feel like you're moving. So far in the initial tests and trials that we've done, we haven't actually got motion, official motion like you have in an aircraft simulator, that's next. But just in the static section, which actually has the motion emulated around you, we've had multiple people reaching for emesis bags and multiple people have thrown up. Someone said to me earlier this week, how do you probably need to replicate some smell and other things like that. Well, we haven't needed to yet because people have automatically done that themselves. So for those of you who have ever had a patient throw up on top of you in an ambulance, or you've had that experience where you have to put up with that for the rest of the trip, you understand what I mean. And I mean learning experiences of that personally. I remember giving activated charcoal to someone that had taken a bucket load of paracetamol, and I had myself seat belted into the patient care chair. Well, I'll never do that again in dealing with those patients because I wore the charcoal because I couldn't undo my seatbelt quick enough. Okay, so how did we get from that to where we are? So initially we went into module design. So this room is actually the first room other than the engineers that helped me construct this at Griffith University that has seen these schematics. So it went with me going into an ambulance, measuring it up, looking at the various aspects of how we can actually look at this to actually be put forward. So as you can see, we've got our side cabinetry, our windows, top-down view with a stretcher chair and things like that. Now the reason I went into so much detail is the people I was working with at the university, none of them, other than one that actually got admitted for falling off his ladder doing some repairs in his house, had ever spent any time inside an ambulance. So they had no idea about the complexity of the space, the sizing and things like that. And then from there, we went into the construction phase. And as you can see, we've got our cabinetry. The lights make it a bit hard to see, but we've got our cabinetry. You can see that there's the windows associated here. It's not actually a window, it's actually a projection screen. Okay, so we have them set up around the ambulance and you'll understand why that's important a little bit later on. And then from that phase, we went into the actual construction of actually making it function like an ambulance. Again, most people just have a module and it's not very functional. This little device that you can see here, which I've sort of blown up, is the brains of an operational ambulance. Now, whether this is an ambulance that works in Australia, works in Canada, or works in the USA, they all have some kind of computing motherboard that runs everything. And when I mean runs everything, it runs your sirens, it runs your lights, your communication, the works, okay? So the incorporation of the ambulance brain with the actual switch that sits at the dashboard, so all those that have utilised the ambulance before, you reach up and you hit your different switches for turning your sirens and lights and all that stuff on. We incorporated that as well. Now the incorporation of those two areas is what actually makes the functionality inside this particular module work. Okay, and without that we wouldn't have our lights, we wouldn't have our sirens, we wouldn't have our functioning oxygen, we wouldn't have our functioning alarms, nothing. Okay, so if the oxygen runs out in this particular unit, the alarm goes off, you have to switch through, change tanks, etc. Okay, fuses blow and the lights don't work, it functions the same way. Okay, so it operates the exact same thing. So if you have to problem solve something going wrong, you would problem solve that the same way you would in an actual real unit. From there, we then moved into the actual creation of the unit itself. No, we didn't steal the badging and things from a parked ambulance at the hospital across the road. We actually did some work with the Queensland Ambulance Service, and they helped provided a lot of the interior and the external badging and things that you can actually see there. And without their help, there's no way we would have been able to get the reality that this unit actually has when you walk inside. So, as you can see on some of these photos, Gary, are those lights able to go off at all, or does it make everything dark? Okay, fair enough. What's a little bit hard to see because of the lighting, but as you can see there, you can have the side windows, the forward view, to actually sort of start to emulate what our actual realism is starting to look like. And this particular, that's just the stationary appearance of it. And then from there, that's what our actual module ended up looking like. So we've got our side panel access door, we've got our rear access door, and everything else functions like you actually have a real module. It is a little boxy, okay, this is our prototype, but the overall functionality of it works quite well. Other things we have done from a space savings perspective and from a room perspective is underneath here we've actually incorporated storage and other avenues like that. So restocking and things like that. We've actually made drawers. Okay, it's just a picture of a wheel, but you pull that out, we've got drawers and storage space and things like that. So it's a one-stop shop. We've got other learning areas around us, and that basically is our central hub for restocking. We had a chance to actually wander through the MD ambulance a few days ago, and we looked at the areas where they restocked the ambulances then to shift. So basically what we've got set up underneath this unit serves as a purpose for our students, so when they finish doing their training or their scenarios or things like that, they go back in there and they know which drawers they go into to actually restock their ambulance or restock that ambulance. For scenarios and training that we do externally to the module, they actually have little trolleys. And that little trolley emulates their ambulance. So at the end of each scenario, they restock their trolley or restock that ambulance via these particular methods. So basically what we've been able to do here is we've actually replicated a fully functioning working ambulance back part or module. Inside that, we've got the Striker Powerlift XPS. So for those of you who happened to be at the Chiefs conference earlier this week, that was the yellow Striker stretcher with the big bariatric sides that come off it. We've got our Striker stair chair, our Cole Pulse 3 defibrillator, full oxygen and suction working, which is unlike some of the other modules that we've seen out there. So everything inside there works. You want to hook the oxygen up and you want to actually have someone on a nebulator, it functions the same way, okay? You want to actually replicate bag masking or CPAP on someone, the oxygen actually works. Full communication, so students are able to communicate via radios and via our tablet platforms that we're putting forward. Fully stocked cabinets and full complement of paramedic equipment. So we've replicated this particular module on the ambulances that our students will do most of their placement at, and that includes the stocking of the cabinetry as well. We recently had a Queensland ambulance paramedic, he's a critical care high acuity response paramedic, come in as one of our sessional lecturers, and looking around, absolutely every cabinet was exactly the same way. So he could step into that ambulance and he could actually grab something out of the cabinetry the same way he would as if he was on a real job. And that sort of blew his mind a little bit that we went to that much detail. So just want to make sure everyone's still awake, because I know I am a boundary between you and morning tea, and I don't want to hold you up too much in regards to that. But just looking at that particular image, where would you say that image was actually taken? A few hands in the air. Sorry? In the simulator, yep. That makes it a little bit easier because of the fact that we've just been talking about it. But if you, so at least I've got some laughs, so at least you're awake. But what the point I'm actually getting is the lighting makes it a little, the sunlight makes it a little bit trickier. But the way it's actually sitting, that when I first showed that to someone that had no idea what I was actually talking about, they responded back with, "Why are you showing me a picture of someone in an ambulance?" And I said, "But I'm not." And I said, "But yes, you are." So we had this two-way conversation for a few seconds about arguing about what the picture was. They were completely convinced that, because if you have a closer look at that image actually was someone inside an ambulance. Now, the way that worked a little bit better, and this was completely unintentional, is when we actually did the filming for this, it actually picked up the sun stripes that go across the window. So for me, when I originally put the planning of this in place, I just assumed to have it set up so we'd capture things as they went past. But on all the Queensland ambulances, they've actually got stripes that go across the window and things like that. So it actually captured it like it was a real window as opposed to just a blank bit of glass. And those little minor technicalities actually made it look more realistic. And with the movement of cars and things that go past, because basically when you're sitting in it, you've got our big front window, which we'll see in a minute. The vehicle you see driving up beside you will then go past the window and out the back window behind you. And that's the bit that blows people's heads, because at the moment, with it stationary, that's what's causing the motion sickness. So that's the next challenge that we've got to try and see, and we've got to try and fix, so that they're not vomiting all over our simulated patients, because it gets messy. This particular picture, where was that taken? Where? Anyone? Hands up for simulator. A few. Hands up for an actual ambulance. Okay, that was the actual ambulance we did the training in, okay? And in the simulator, you actually see this officer actually moving his hand, looking, talking on the communications and things like that. Okay, so basically, what I'm going to show you now is about a sort of 2-minute video that shows how we actually put that together and actually brought it to life so it functions with students' involvement inside it. Now, hopefully this will play. It was very hard to get him to keep a straight face. It was quite difficult. Okay, so, I mean, as you can see, it does start to capture the movement, and the students were quite surprised just how realistic it actually was. We've run a few nurses and doctors through it as well in the same sense, and again, they were taken back by just how realistic the movement, the sensory movement actually was, and going from there. Now, before we finish off, when I talk about some of the other challenges that we've got coming up with us, the universities, working for a university does have its pluses over working within a government organisation. So I've noticed over the past few years is that the support and the technical expertise you can get within that university to help you achieve this type of thing is quite amazing. They provided electrical engineers to help with the rewiring of the actual computer module itself, because basically what we did was we took the internal workings of an actual ambulance, cables, tubing, the works, had some kind of a schematic diagram that the engineers looked at and went, yeah, that's great, but makes no sense, I'll do it myself. And they put it back together in a very short period of time. They also gave us the expertise to actually build it from scratch. So instead of actually taking a module, which technically you could do from a decommissioned vehicle and actually replicate it in the same manner, we actually built this one from scratch. The reason for that is so that we can actually trial the next phase, which will be the hydraulic implementation, so that we can take away some of that sensory overload of not working. Now, we're not going to stick it up so it moves around and functions in the same capacity of an airline simulator. However, the same methodology is what we will apply to it. So we will get it so that it emulates you going forward. So as the vehicle actually moves forward, with the momentum of the screens moving around you, you won't get as much of a sensory overload as you do when you're sitting there with things moving around you but you're not actually moving. And then the same as when you're trying to slow down, you'll get that same effect. So if the students are actually trying to do CPR, for example, they'll actually have to position themselves in the right period. Now, we emulated some CPR, which we didn't catch on video, unfortunately, the other week. And that student, without even being told how to do it, automatically looked at ways of trying to position themselves so they wouldn't fall over. And that was quite a bit of a light bulb moment for myself and some of the other lecturers that were there, because they were actually able to comprehend, as opposed to just sitting there doing it on the carpet, being inside that vehicle, it was a slightly different technique. And they repositioned them in such a way to actually do it. So, other things that we're looking at doing is being in this room actually is kind of cool, because this room is a little bit bigger, but we'll be about 3/4 of the size of it for our actual next phase of our project, which actually puts this in a dedicated simulation space. At the moment, that's in a pilot room, and we have enough space to get the stretcher out, but that's about it. The next phase room is actually same size, 3/4 of this size, but it's not just going to be a room. The walls will actually be completely and utterly fully interactive. So instead of actually just having in a white walled, white roof room, the walls actually will come alive from about 8 to 10 different projectors that are spread across the room. So depending on the scenario we're actually doing, that will actually change the surrounds around you. So as the students actually reverse this ambulance up to pull into the hospital, they'll see the hospital reversing up around the screens and on their back door, and when they actually open the ambulance rear doors, the hospital emergency room entry point will actually be there in front of them. And it'll be positioned in such a way so that they can just walk through the actual door to take their patient out. From there, we'll have another room that's directly across from that will be a completely 360-degree projected room, which could actually be turned into whatever you want. And for our purposes, we've got a lot of interprofessional learning we do with the medical students, physio students and nursing students. Our next phase actually would be to have that room set up so that they could then hand over to those students so they can then take on the simulation for themselves. And we can replicate that room for whatever you want. There's another room I'm in the process of trying to gather funding for and support for, which is my aeromedical evacuation room. I've showed a couple of examples of how that's going to work. And that won't just involve the walls, it will involve the floors as well. So when that aircraft takes off or leaves a particular scene, the entire floor will disappear just like you would in a helicopter or an aircraft. So I'm looking to see how many people grab on for something and when we actually implement that. We also do, our medical school also does a lot of very immersive clinical engagement scenarios as well. And having our paramedic program now part of the School of Medicine, our paramedic students will actually incorporate their part of that scenario. So instead of the medical students just being presented with X, Y, Z of a case, our paramedic students will actually do the pre-hospital care and treatment of that particular case, and they will actually then hand it over across to the medical students who will then take on their particular care in hospital for that particular patient. And after the medical students handle it, it's then over to the nursing students who then look after the various ward care. And from there, it's over to the nutrition and dietetic students who then look after that particular student for their particular part, and the physio students for their particular part. So we're incorporating a massive collection of immersive simulation that doesn't just affect one cohort of a university, but goes through various different people within that whole of healthcare approach. And other technology that we're looking at implementing with this is our telemetry with our patient care records, our ultrasound, our ECGs and things like that. So we're not just going to have it so that here's your patient, but we'll actually do it in a newer technology sense where we will transfer electronically through our intranet the patient care record of that particular simulated patient over to the medical students so they can see it as it arrives, or we can emulate sending ECGs through for the medical students to have a look to see what's coming, or the ultrasound, or things like that as part of a sit rep or a call to the hospital to say that we're inbound with XYZ patient. So really trying different ways to engage as much as possible. And overall, it's something that's never been tried before within our area, and in the small little pilot tree that we've had so far, it seems to be raising a fair bit of success, and people are quite surprised by just how engaging it actually changes the whole scenario and set kick-off techniques. That's my contact details if you would like to know more. And I do want to thank you all for allowing me to speak today. Thank you, Gary.
So in February, we'll be looking forward to the next version, Duncan. We're going to make a quick transition. We are going to cut into your break. I'm sorry about that, but I just want to say that the next topic is very serious. And so we'll do an abbreviated break, but please pay attention and hold off going to the restroom if you can. Is that yours? Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you very much for having me here today. I really appreciate being here. This presentation was originally an hour and a half. We cut it down to 30 minutes. I think I have 5 minutes now, but I had 2 Red Bulls this morning, so we're going to be okay. We'll get through it fairly quickly here. I'm certainly not a subject matter expert on mental health, but I'm probably a subject matter expert on the failure that we had in our system and identifying some of those things that we could do better and recognize what's going on with suicides across the nation and not only in ours. So I kind of want you to look at this as what the CP's role could be in how we recognize the mental health effects, but also maybe the mental health effects that are going to start affecting our CPs when they're out there in the field and what's going on. It's quite interesting for us from the States to see what's happening in Canada, because I think you guys are light years ahead of us when it comes to taking care of your providers. We're still kind of struggling through it because we're such a dysfunctional EMS system in the United States. We're not as put together as you guys are here. So first off, raise a hands of how many people have had a suicide in their agency over the last year. Quite a bit. So I think as leaders, our goal should be that when somebody like me stands up here and asks that question, that goes to 0. So Lewis actually gave a great history of our system yesterday, so with time and all that, we'll just kind of go through. But the important part of this is our system has transitioned from a volunteer system into a paid system. We're about a staff of 30 full-time people. But the transition and the entry into our system is very important when it comes to mental health and the expectations of a provider and how our people have entered into our system and how they've become paramedics or become EMTs and what those expectations are. In the original days of our volunteer system was, come and jump in an ambulance, lights and sirens, it's cool, and you get to drive fast with no expectation of what the horrific events you might be a part of. So with that, just a quick video here. So we enter into this system with this world of resilience, but the resilience that we enter into is that resilience of the leader being tough and making sure we maintain our staffing, making sure we are there to make sure we have responses. And all this stuff we go through with the sacrifice, the loss of our family time, personal safety. As we move up through this evolution of the entry into the system, into this leadership role, that resilience is a little bit different than what you guys are showing up here with the resilience to the battlefield. And as leaders, we need to still recognize and make sure that we are compassionate to the fact that that resilience that we are gaining as leaders sometimes does not equate to what we need to be teaching our people. Oh, sorry.
Emergency. Hey, it's Mo, and I need an ambulance at Loveless's house on the National. He's hanging. I just cut him down. I'm starting CPR now. Starting CPR. Okay. This will be at 223's residence for medical assist. CPR in progress. 223's residence on National. 915, 960. Expedited up here. 915 on scene. About 960, so you can get care flight now. Andrew was found hanging in his house.
Are you fucking kidding me?
No.
Oh my fucking God, Matt. I'll have Rescue 2 call me.
Okay. Humboldt, Medic 15, interrupt HH with 1 code. Medic 15, 10-4. Okay, some logistics. What's going on here? They're going to ground transport to the airport for medical call-outs. Apparently, it's this event here sucked the life out of everybody here. They've got a crew coming from Battle Mountain. It's going to be in a Battle Mountain ambulance. They don't have our digital channel, so it's going to be analog for them. Okay. And then if things get a little more dicey, the McDermott folks, we can call them down here. Okay. But that's kind of the where it stands right now, so you know. Okay. How are you guys doing? Yeah, we're okay. We're just kind of waiting to see what's going on, so. Okay. You guys get any updates at all? No, haven't heard anything. Okay, I'll tell you what I know. Chronologically, apparently, he was down at the wine bar. Okay. Made a comment to a female down there as he was leaving that he was going to go kill himself, but don't call because it'll be done before anybody gets up there. She had Kevin's number. She calls Kevin. Kevin goes up there, makes entry, and finds him in the closet. Okay. Starts CPR, and then I think you guys pretty well know the rest of the story from there. Right. But that's kind of the circumstance of how it all happened. He's stable right now. So yeah, he's stable, but I'm not sure what his prognosis is. Stable can beat anything. Right. That's kind of where we stand. We're going to have a CISM team come out, hopefully from Reno. If you or your partner want to sit in on that and kind of hear how it all went from another angle, you guys are more than welcome. Okay.
So that was a call in our system with one of our medics. At the time, we had all these barriers, we had all these things put up in front of us that, we thought this guy would get better. We thought things would just evolve, that, he's a tough medic, he drank to have fun, he did all these things. The fear of the judgment of his peers around him, small town, difficulty with resources, difficulty with what we had available to us at the time, difficulty for me as the chief to recognize what he was going through and that it just wasn't part of the culture, just wasn't part of what we're all used to. We deal with this, and sometimes this is how we deal with it. And definitely then the stigma around this whole suicide and what do we do with it and how do we deal with it. What happened from that is this is what evolved.
I'd like to share a story. It's a tale of darkness and revival. I'm a paramedic and I have PTSD. Those are hard words for me to say, and it's extremely hard for me to talk about. I sought help in early 2014 following the death of an EMT at my service that brought to surface a lot of emotions that I had effectively suppressed for the previous 2 years. In December 2012, at 23:08 to be exact, I responded to the attempted suicide of a coworker and friend. It took years to admit that that night had changed me, and to understand the effect that it had on me. I recall people constantly asking me if I was okay and wanting to talk about it, and I, on the other hand, didn't want to talk at all. In fact, I remember feeling angry when my coworkers brought it up and hating the looks on their faces when they saw me in the hall. I felt like I was coping fine because I didn't really feel anything at all. During those years, I became someone that I didn't recognize. I couldn't sleep, I drank way too much, and I was pissed off all the time. I picked up as many hours as I could and took on extra responsibilities, and I figured that if I could keep my head down and work, that it would just pass on its own. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I could have done something to prevent my friend's attempt, or at least not to let it get that far. I knew that something was going on with him, and I didn't say anything. I did nothing. For whatever reason, he didn't feel like he had the support from the people that knew him the best, people that could relate to his situation better than anyone. I went through the next few years pushing myself to the limits of my capabilities physically and emotionally. And I had emotional outbursts, bad temper, and I isolated myself from just about everybody. I felt completely out of control, and one day it all came crashing down. I sat in my truck at the beginning of the workday and I couldn't make myself go in. And I started to cry, and then I couldn't stop. And I called a friend of mine who's a flight nurse and explained to her what was happening, and I had no idea why I was crying or why I was upset or anything. I felt absolutely exhausted, and I wanted nothing more than to go to sleep, and I didn't care if I ever woke up. I was a new paramedic at the time when that call happened, and I wasn't prepared for that. No one ever told me during my training how much this profession would rock everything that I thought that I knew about the world and change my views on humanity. No one told me that my life could be put in danger at times, or that I would be called to unimaginable scenes, or that working in a small town, I wasn't ready for the possibility of running on people that I knew. Such pressure of expectation takes its toll on the best of us, and it creates many self-doubting moments. We are required to project emotional and physical competence, confidence, and the ability to deal with and manage anything that's placed on our shoulders. It can drain you beyond your reserves of resilience and make you more vulnerable to ailments such as PTSD. It's a continuous challenge living with post-traumatic stress. I have good days and I have bad ones still. And I've recently begun a more aggressive treatment again, and I'm hoping to get some relief soon. Throughout the process, I found that the resources that are out there are not really appropriate for EMS, and the ones that are very limited. It was hard enough to admit and ask for help, and then the lack of resources made it much worse. So no one really talks about PTSD or depression, but we need to. And I fully understand the stigma behind mental illness. I am one of those people who struggle to understand something that I cannot see nor immediately have an effect on. In February 2015, I was assigned to a group project with a few other providers. We chose to do our research project on mental health and suicide in EMS, and we aspired to put our efforts into a subject that could potentially make a difference. And that's what we all signed up for. isn't it, is to make a difference. We were taught how to care for others in their times of need, but we were never taught how to care for ourselves or care for each other. If someone would have told me in my first EMT class what I could expect to see, feel, or hear, maybe I would have been able to better prepare myself. If I would have been told that this industry could take me to some pretty dark places, maybe I could have better prepared my mind for battle. And after having been in the darkest depths of PTSD, where I wasn't quite suicidal, but I often felt like death would be a relief, I know how valuable this information is, and I want my brothers and sisters in EMS out there to understand that their symptoms are real and their struggles are shared, and that there is help and there is hope.
So that's kind of where usually I need to stop and walk out of the room, because that's pretty revealing to a chief when this video shows up on your desk from one of your captains who's one of your lead paramedics in our agency, integrated very much throughout our hospital, and shows me this video that I had no idea the trials and tribulations she went through. But then to look at it as an opportunity to say, hey, we can make a difference and we can change. So the light of day is the paramedic you heard the 911 call on, Andrew, was one of our top paramedics, outstanding, and he still is. So this is the result of the survey that they came, and I'll just kind of zip through this fairly quickly, and then afterwards, if you want to ask me some questions on what we've done and some of the challenges we've had, feel free to. But quite an amazing survey that went out, at 4,000 responses, and these responses came back in such a short period of time that everybody was just astounded. I mean, within a week's period of time, there was almost 2,000 of those responses, and in 2 weeks, they had about 4,000 responses, and they left this survey open for about 30 days. There's all kinds of results in this, and I'm just going to give you a snapshot of them, but basically 85% of the paramedics interviewed in the United States said that they had experienced critical stress, and 66% didn't seek help. What was interesting is that 37% of them contemplated suicide, which is quite high compared to the CDC study in the United States of the national average, and then 6% is attempted, which is, again, astounding. But more amazing to us and to me when I saw these results back is that what we saw is this declining graph of when they were contemplating compared to when they were getting help. So when they had no encouragement and no support, the numbers are real high of what they were trying to do. When they did have full support and encouragement, and especially from their leadership teams, and there was pathways for them, their ability to, or that rate went down dramatically. Only 75% or 75% of the workplaces in the United States that we surveyed had access to help, but the help was very non-productive. So a lot of the providers just said that the counselors just didn't get it. Some of them went in for their hour session and the counselor left the room crying, or told them to quit their job, or didn't even want to focus on what the job was. The survey results on who felt support, only 48% felt support from management, which is horrific in my point of view, because that should be 100%. And then the other numbers there that you see what we can do. But I love this quote here: the culture of any organization is shaped by the worst behavior the leader is willing to tolerate. And I think we have to be more empathetic and open to how we look at suicide in our industry. Again, the numbers showed that those that contemplated suicide, 56% of them did with no support, and 23% of them did with full support. Now, we have a long ways to go to get that 23% down, but as you can see, those numbers decline through the different questions. 49% didn't sense a need. I think all of these, when I put leadership underneath there, it's a leadership issue. We have to create that sense of need. We have to create that openness. We have to take the stigma away, and we as leaders have to do something better as our people entering into the system, and while they're in the system, how we can get them help. So just real quickly, like I said, I'm not a subject matter expert, but in our industry, we need to start understanding, and we need to understand things like the mental health continuum model and understand what that means and how that affects our paramedics, so we can recognize when they become ill and how do we get them back down. And as we saw, both with Andrew, he's a fully functioning paramedic. He's one of my lead flight paramedics right now. We entered him back to the system. We've removed the complete stigma out of our hospital and out of our pre-hospital care system that he had an issue. We continually support him every day, and now he is becoming an advocate against suicide in EMS. And Monique also, she's now talking nationally about this, and for someone to be able to put a video together like that and put it out nationally, it's quite remarkable in my mind. So our program, basically, it's leadership awareness. See something, say something. And we engage our employees all the time with education. We also have a system with First Watch that Alina Health does too. We work real close with them on triggers, so when we have something that falls into what we would consider a critical incident, we get a trigger, and then that triggers a team approach with a risk assessment tool that we developed, and then we have those people meet with myself or my leadership team and see if there's anything we can do for them, and then navigate them throughout our system. We also started a call center where our paramedics are able to call in and actually get some help if they need. The tools that we're using, like I said, is First Watch. We have an EAP program, and now we have a more engaged EAP program, not one where the paramedic meets for an hour and the counselor leaves crying. And then, of course, we use some of the other tools out there with Code Green and Reviving Responders. There are some great tools out there, and it's not a one tool fits all. It's a multiple of tools that you can get out to your people. This video that is one we put together, and it's about empathy, but I do need to recognize Kevin Davis is a Canadian artist that he gave us permission to use this song on.
It was a dark and stormy night, nor'easter rolling in. It's a long 12 hours, the power's out again. I pray for inner strength and that we don't lose no lives. Just another day in the first responders' eyes. Half a cup of coffee's gone, the first run comes in. A car slid off the road, there's a family trapped within. My heart beats like a hammer, I can barely catch my breath. I'm thinking the worst and hoping for the best. Yeah, we ain't superheroes, we're just ordinary people trying to make a difference, and the first on every scene. It's a heavy, heavy burden to carry all this burden when you can't unsee the things you've seen. It keeps going on. When those sirens are gone. Now my shift is finally over, I gotta deal with what's mine and try to find a way to leave those tragedies behind. So I hug my 2 children, I kiss on my wife. Just another day in a first responder's life. Yeah, we ain't superheroes, we're just ordinary people trying to make a difference, and the first on every scene. It's a heavy, heavy burden to carry all this burden when you can't unsee the things you've seen. It keeps going on. When those sirens are gone. Flashing lights fill the air, broken bodies everywhere. Another bad dream is stealing my sleep. 'Cause we ain't superheroes, trying to make a difference, and the first on every scene. And it's a heavy, heavy burden to carry all this hurting when you can't unsee the things you've seen. It keeps going on. When those sirens are gone, it keeps going on. When those sirens are gone.
So hopefully a couple takeaway home points with this whole thing. And, you know, we need to change the stigma, and we need to act now. You know, we can't cause any more harm, but we definitely as leaders need to engage and act now and change who we are and how we recognize it and why we became what we became. Obviously, we need more studies, and those are coming. There's a lot of people engaged in this process, and I think we will make a difference, but we'd ask that the leaders make the change first and really start engaging in the employees. So thank you very much. If you can answer any questions, I'm more than happy to afterwards.
Thank you, Pat, and this affects every paramedic service in every country. David Waters from Australia, Martin from the UK, myself, and Randy Mello are going to get together by conference call in the next few weeks and start cataloging what's going on and try to get some inter-country coordination. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to start at our next assigned time, which is 10:40, and so please take care of that, and we'll get started again promptly at 10:40.
Check 1 2 1 2 testing 1 2 check.
Test, my test. Test.
Checking 1 2 1 2 check. Good.
Are you?
Should I have an expression? Can you see okay? See us okay? Okay. This mic's on, so I don't want to get covered. Actually, Mary. I the logo is out. Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Okay, everybody, we're ready to get started again. If you take your seats. That's not yours? Uh-oh. Glad we found out now. Let me fix it. Oh, it's B8? Yeah, okay. I must have linked it wrong. Let me fix it. Okay, let's try that. No? Uh-oh. All right, let me pull it out of Ann's file. It's the only one I've made a mistake with so far. We store them in 2 different folders just through this kind of a circumstance. Hopefully this is the right one. Do you have it on jump drive?
No. I emailed it. No, it's definitely.
And we've got the wrong one in 12D8. Can you see if you have Dana's in your email? We have the wrong file in 12D8. Can you see if you have her email and save it into D? We have a long lunch today. Is it in yours or mine? Mine? Okay. And is it 8? Okay.
Should look like this. Should have a picture of it. And I can just advance the slide manually using it.
Yeah, this is okay, hopefully this will. Is that it? Hey. Okay, now we're ready to get going. Thank you, everyone. So this next session is the community paramedic in-home transfusion of blood components and products from Alberta Health Services. And we have mislabeled Dana. She's actually an ACP, so we want to make that correction. And Dana, thank you very much for being here.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today in beautiful Saskatoon. It's so lovely here. So I'd like to talk to you this morning about a home blood transfusion pilot that our program in Calgary designed and implemented, and talk to you where we're with it today. So I want to start with a patient story. Just prior to Christmas in 2014, we received a phone call from a physician that we'd received referrals from previously, Tom Baker Cancer Center physician, asking us, do you guys do blood transfusions? And we had a hard time saying no. And we said, maybe. And he had a patient that was end of life, requiring transfusions. And day medicine, as it turns out, was closed for the holidays. And the only alternative for this patient would have been the emergency department, and it would have been via ambulance, because this patient was very frail. We did that transfusion. So why home blood transfusions? So we know blood transfusions improve quality of life, in particular for patients living with chronic diseases and patients at end of life. And as it turned out, there's a large unmet need for transfusions for extremely frail patients due to health system capacity issues and barriers such as mobility issues. So then we started asking some more questions. Really, home blood transfusions? Isn't this risky? So yes, it does have risks, but any intervention or treatment has risks. Is there precedence? There is precedence in Canada. Nova Scotia has a home transfusion program that's delivered by RNs, but there was nothing in Alberta. Ron, are there standards? Yes, there are standards. As it turns out, there's lots of standards provincially and nationally. Where are we going to duplicate an existing service? No, not in Alberta. There's nothing, there was no home transfusion program in Alberta. And was there a need? Yeah, we heard that loud and clear from our patients and from our physicians. Is it in scope? Yes, blood transfusions are in scope for paramedics. And are there training requirements? There are many training requirements. Although we receive the training in school, there's additional requirements specifically from Alberta Health Services. So once we asked and answered some of these questions, we thought, let's build a pilot. And the pilot objective was fairly simple, to show that blood transfusions can be done in the home by community paramedics safely, and that we can also improve access to this care and improve patient experience. So we leveraged an existing partnership that we had with the Tom Baker Cancer Center, and Ryan spoke to this yesterday. And we also had to partner with Calgary Lab Services, Transfusion Medicine. So this is the group that provides all the blood components and products in Southern Alberta. So there's lots of teamwork, and this is just a little picture of my partners in crime, Joanna and Tara from Transfusion Medicine. So we, again, asked some questions, identified a lot of the risks. We had a good partnership, and now we needed to get more of the stakeholders. So we needed to talk to physicians that specialize in transfusion medicine, our community paramedics, our medical director, Alberta Health Services Policy and Procedure Department, our college, the lab technicians, and patients and families. We do, as Ryan mentioned, we have a patient advisor for our program. Then we needed to start talking about the design. We knew we needed to meet the applicable standards. We needed to manage and mitigate risks. We needed to develop education practitioners specific to our community paramedics. There was equipment requirements, so we had to purchase specialized coolers, and we had to validate those coolers for extremes of temperature and time. We had to develop procedures and protocols, develop referral criteria for the patient, and sort of overarching this was project management and change management. In particular, change management, I think many of you have probably designed the most brilliant procedure and sort of dropped it onto your practitioner's lap only to see it fail. So you really have to work on change management. and then an important part of this too was developing an evaluation for this pilot. And then we had a pilot. Little movie reference for you. I don't know if any of you saw Lost Boys. And I'm allowed to use vampires. Transfusion medicine has actually endorsed the use of vampires in any of my presentations about blood. So we designed the pilot. We designed it to start on October the 8th. The evaluation or the pilot period would be either 2 months or 40 transfusions, whichever came first. Initially, it was only to administer red blood cells. We knew we needed 2 community paramedics, and that's due to standards and also patient safety. You have to verify patient's identity. You have to verify the products or components. We also designed sort of a safety mechanism that transfusion medicine physicians would review all of our referrals. Blood is in short supply, and you have to ensure the right patients are receiving components or products. The initial design had 1 location for blood pickup and drop off, and then of course reactions. We had to have a really good plan in place for reactions. I mean, a lot of these patients, the more transfusions you receive, the greater your reaction risk is. So we had to ensure there was protocols in place, that we had equipment, and the ability to consult with a physician in real time, and of course the ability to phone 911. So before we launched the pilot though, we decided that we would do a pre-pilot transfusion just to help validate the procedures we developed and to sort of just physically do that process to see if everything we had developed was going to work well. So this is Mr. Eckert and his wife, and he's since passed away, but he was an ex-IRCP officer, a lovely man, a big man, 6'2". We identified him through his physician as sort of our pre-pilot transfusion patient, and wouldn't you know it, his hemoglobin held for 3 weeks. So we just kept waiting and waiting and waiting. His hemoglobin finally dropped and we were able to do the transfusion. So I joined, this is one of our community paramedics, Dave, and we also had transfusion medicine safety lead join us for the transfusion. And what's interesting about this is Mrs. Hecker, she's pretty tiny. She would have to wake up at 4 in the morning to get him to a 10 o'clock appointment. And essentially it was a 10-hour day for her, and she's elderly. She was exhausted, but absolutely lovely. Baked us banana bread, and was just, they were so thrilled to have us there. So I guess one thing that I do want to mention, that it went well, but it made us go back to the drawing board with a couple of things, just in terms of the way we were documenting in our EPCR. So we just went back to the drawing board, made a couple alterations to the pilot, and then we were able to implement the pilot. So evaluation. A lot of these ideas they seem like great ideas, but I think we really need to develop questions, ask and answer questions to determine, are they good ideas? So we had a number of evaluation questions, and they can be loosely grouped into 3 themes: clinical activity and patient safety, patient and family experience, and also our staff experience. So hindsight is a good thing, especially when you're evaluating, but evaluation is also very dynamic, those of you who do it. I'm not a researcher, but it's nice. Some of it is real time and some of it is retrospectively, and the further along we got in the pilot, we knew we needed to change some of our evaluation questions, and we were able to collect some qualitative and quantitative data, and we did surveys, we did interviews and chart reviews. So the pilot started. So what did we learn? So these are just a small sample of some of the quotes from our patients and their families. So I was able to interview our patients, all the patients that were in the pilot. It was an incredibly rewarding experience. I know I need to improve my interview skills. I mean, I came from a background where I just wanted a patient to say yes or no. I didn't want the story behind it, so this has been a real shift for me to let them talk about their experience. I will say that we have to be mindful of some of these, some of the data, the qualitative data, because I think there's a positive bias. These patients did agree to be part of the pilot, so we have to be very careful. It was a small sample size as well. I did try my best to get the good, the bad, and the ugly from them, but it really was overwhelmingly positive. And this is in a contrast to the transfusions they received in acute care. So nobody's saying that receiving a transfusion in acute care is a bad experience or a bad thing, but you can see some of the comments they made when receiving a transfusion in their home. What else do we learn? And I don't need you to go through this whole process, but it's kind of complicated. The amount of steps that are needed to be put into place before you even get to that little small circle there is incredible. So the transfusion is easy. Our community paramedics can do it with their eyes closed. They're used to administering medications. They're used to monitoring and assessing patients, so that's really quite easy. They're used to talking to patients. But there's all those steps that you need to have in place to ensure things are safe and efficient. So we're just like, wow, this is really kind of a complicated thing. The other thing we learned is our community paramedics are incredible. Not everyone bakes banana bread. Not every home is clean. Not all patients are easy to talk to. Not all family is easy to talk to. I show you pictures of our paramedics doing things they love. See in the corner there, that checkered lumberjack, right, Canadian. That's Michelle. What you can't see is that she's about to chop her boyfriend's head off. Yeah, so I'm showing you pictures of things they love. And what's also interesting is there's patients in here. So they're doing, patient care is something they love. Riding horses, hiking are things they love too. So without our community paramedics, we don't have a home blood transfusion program. So just a couple of the other key findings. I'm sure everyone wants to know, were there any adverse events or poor outcomes? No. The patient family feedback was, again, incredibly positive. Transfusions take a long time, so there's a lot of time, not just on scene, but the pickup and the drop-off of the blood. And that we really had some issues and challenges with the referral and scheduling processes. So we made recommendations, I think 32 of them, and we implemented them all. The biggest recommendation we made was to continue to, this was no longer a pilot, and this was offered as our just regular program services. But we needed to limit them to one a day because it represented a large impact on our program. And we knew that we need to update our referral criteria and our scheduling processes. So these are just a couple of the recommendations that we did implement. You can just see here is our referral. Whoop. Jerry, Anne, help. This is kind of the way of my life. Can everyone start to see the slides? That's something about a document recovery.
So did it, this is the one or not? This is it?
No.
What one?
Let's keep, are we on? Yeah, keep going. So close. Right there. 16, yeah. Looks like you go from slide. Saskatchewan. Yeah. And then from current slide. Let's try that. It's not projecting up there. Sorry. Oh, it's okay. It was locked up. It was crazy. I think we're on 14, right? 16. Almost done.
I know. Stay with me, I'm almost done. Yeah, okay, there. Okay.
Got it.
Okay, so just quickly, these are the two like big recommendations were just that this was a much desired service and sort of everyone wanted it. So we really needed to refine our eligibility criteria. We needed to reserve this for sort of the sickest of the sick and the people that really had challenges getting into an acute care setting. We also knew to support our patient coordinator with scheduling these, we needed to, like I said, there's a lot of moving parts, you need a lot of things in place. We developed a checklist for them. So, current state with transfusions. So we continue to do transfusions. This data is current to May 15th. As of May 15th, we had done 88 transfusions for 31 unique patients. We've had 2 events that there was a minor transfusion reaction that's of course reportable, that the community paramedic was able to easily manage on scene. We looked at 7-day outcomes of these patients just to see if they have any, reactions. One of the things we do is place a 2-hour post-transfusion follow-up phone call, which is really not standard practice even in day medicine, but because we know that there is maybe some more risk in the community, we follow up with the patient, make sure everything's okay. There were 2 EMS events from these patients, but upon chart review, it didn't appear to be related to the transfusion. It was more associated with their disease, a disease progression. There was 5 ED visits, and 4 were related to a progression of those disease. So a lot of these patients have a cancer diagnosis and not the transfusion, and then one of the patients had just an upper respiratory tract infection.
So 18 patients have received 1 transfusion only. 12 patients had 2 to 7 transfusions, and one of our patients has had 26 transfusions and counting. We've administered 144 units of red blood cells, 37 units of platelets, and 4 doses of albumin. So challenges. We continue to sort of uncover challenges, and we see problems as opportunities for solutions in our program. We know transfusions represent a large time commitment, so we've really been looking at sort of novel ways of leveraging. I know I think Hamilton is really doing a good job of leveraging modified duty staff, so we've been doing that with the pickup and the drop-off of the blood. Also that patient identity verification piece. We've opened up additional lab drop-off sites. Calgary's a large, large city geographically. And also because it's a lot of time for the community paramedics on scene with some of our patients and some of the homes that are a little more challenging to be in. They have the ability to rotate through the transfusion. We're a small but mighty program with finite resources, so that's why we really have to continue to work on that referral criteria. And also remember our 1 patient with 25 transfusions, we have to develop discharge criteria as well. At the back end, we are seeking sources of funding. And really this model, when we design this model of care, it is transferable to it could be dropped into other geographical areas or delivered by other healthcare service types. So we continue to learn. We encounter sort of I never thought of that every week. I talk to Tara and Joanna in transfusion medicine. Sometimes it seems like daily. We have an FAQ document to support our practitioners. We're looking at different ways of sort of communicating the updates to our practitioners, and we have continued plans to interview our patients, and then we really work on that communication. While not a driver, to develop the program, we have to look at costs. So receiving a transfusion at the Tom Baker Cancer Center is about $1,300. So if you go to the emergency department via ambulance, that's $1,400. And I'll just disclosure, I'm not a health economist. And then when you look at the time for the family or the caregivers, it's hard to quantify that, the cost. There's financial costs, but there's a whole other bunch of costs we need to consider. But the cost currently for our program in a patient's home, 7 days a week, is $400, and like I said, we're trying to leverage existing resources in the system. But when we think about value, we can free up some beds in Tom Baker and day medicine so chemotherapy, for instance, so where they can get treatments that aren't currently available in the community. And you can see Mr. Eckert here is sleeping. And what you don't see is that Mrs. Eckert is also sleeping. She was exhausted, and we gave her 10 hours of her life back that day. So you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, except if my son's in net, he's a terrible goalie. And you can see here we just have a giant snowbank you have a pretty good chance of scoring a goal on this kid. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity. All right, are you guys okay to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I think we're good. Good morning. My name's Paul Bollinger. I'm with Health Share of Oregon, and I'll explain a little bit about what Health Share is because probably no one here knows because it only happens in the state of Oregon. So we'll go ahead and hop in. I'll also introduce my colleagues, but kind of want to start off with the opening line for a bad joke. So a regulator, an educator, and a payer walk into a room and want to create a data set for community paramedicine. So this is our story. And that didn't do it. No. There we go. Okay, state of Oregon, in case you forgot where we were, we're just below the state of Washington, just above California. Yes, we're always above California. Quick pop culture question. Anyone seen the show Portlandia? Okay, well, we live it every day. So we're based in Portland, Oregon, home of the Portland Timbers, Mount Hood. But the big thing saying around Portland is keep Portland weird. And what we do in healthcare in Portland and in the state of Oregon is a bit weird. There was a small thing that a few of you may have heard of called the Affordable Care Act a few years ago. Well, a lot of money was infused into the state of Oregon, and we have what's called the Great Experiment going on around how to improve healthcare delivery system in our state and at our local communities. So put a bird on it for those of you that obscure Portlandia reference. Okay, so before the Affordable Care Act or the ACA or Obamacare, healthcare in Oregon was a big empty puzzle pieces. There was your dental care organizations and your mental health organizations, medical care, and your labs and your dentists and hospitals and everything were all mixed together. And the people that really suffered the most were the indigent population. And the group that I work with works with our Medicaid population, which is a government-funded way of providing health care. So what we were able to do is take that whole mess, convert it all up into what's called a coordinated care organization. And coordinated care organizations are using the Medicaid money at the federal level, which used to be state administered, is now administered at the local level. So in the state of Oregon, there's 16 coordinated care organizations serving the Medicaid population. And we're now looking at the member experience from a very local perspective. So what you see in the Portland area is going to be really different than happens in the southern or eastern parts of the state. So we had to really look at what healthcare transformation was going to be different, and can we do more with less? Can we do more of what really works for our own community? Can we let go of stuff? Is that even possible in healthcare? And how are we going to really improve the quality of life for Oregonians? So we kind of are taking two different approaches with that. Is change the delivery system, look at auxiliary providers, look at other ways of delivering healthcare, and really look at what healthcare's relationship is to the community resources that are available. So back in October of 2014, HealthShare, and HealthShare represents about 240,000 members that are on Medicaid. So we administer the Medicaid benefit of health, physical, mental, dental care, and medical, non-medical transportation. So in spring of 2014, HealthShare decided, you know, EMS hasn't played a real big role in this. Let's get everyone together. And we kind of put an all call out saying, if you're interested in this, come to a hotel room similar to this, and let's talk. Well, we had 200 people show up, and it was the payer community, public health, the regulators, the other CCOs in the area, and EMS providers. And this is the first time a lot of these folks had a table-to-table talk, to have leaders in the payer community and the health systems to really say, wow, you are more than just a transport organization. You are a clinical extension to the work that we do. So flash forward to where we are now. We have a real active coalition. We have about 14 different community paramedicine sites statewide, and as you'll see, each of the stars represents one of our sites. Interstate 5, which is the large north-south freeway system that runs from the Mexican border to the Canadian border, runs along the western corner of our state. 80% of our population lives within 10 to 20 kilometers of Interstate 5. So that's why there's a big concentration of community paramedicine programs kind of along that one line. Up in the northern part of the state is where Portland is located. There's 3 counties there, and we have about 6 different programs there, serving about 1.3 million people in the population. But many of you that are from Australia, Canada, and the UK are fortunate that you don't work in the healthcare system that we work in. Just to give you a snapshot of what it's like in the 3 counties, we have 21 different fire departments, 2 primary ambulance contractors, 2 coordinated care organizations, 4 911 answering points, and 1.5 million people. So trying to get, and then I forgot about the countless insurance schemes that we have going on in the Oregon area. So trying to get these folks to play nice in the sandbox has been a challenge at best. So, but it's working, and it's been amazing that we were able to finally get folks together around community paramedicine to say this is really a betterment for our community and really looking at existing resource pools. So these are some of our initial groups that we worked with. We were able to work cross-border with the state of Washington also. So we have, Portland's right on the Columbia River, and across the river is the state of Washington. So we've pulled Washington in, but we've had the county health services, other CCOs, the fire departments, ambulance providers, academia. So we got a really well-rounded representation. It is our kind of core community paramedicine group in our community.
So we started making discussions and having a monthly discussion meeting between all of the organizations that Paul just described. We had payers, we had regulators, and we had academia, myself. We started hearing a frequent theme coming through the discussions that we were having, and that theme was that we were being able to find money for pilots, and those pilots were funding those small agencies to do community paramedicine in limited capacity, and we're finding N values of 25, 9, maybe 30, 45 at a time. Some of you Canadians have presented 2,000 case studies. So we're really struggling with small N's, and when we demonstrate success with our small pilot studies, we're going back to the payers and saying, hey, we demonstrated great success, we saved all this money, we made this great impact on patients' lives, and they're not ready to write a $1 million check off of 45 people. Reasonably so. So we started asking the question, how do we fix this? Because we're not going to get the money infused to one organization to be able to provide an N value large enough to create the return on investment for funding, for long-term investment. So we decided to do something. And this is building off of several presentations from yesterday and today. We decided to start burning down some of our silos and collaborating on some of the data points that we were already collecting. What we needed was big data to funnel into our triple aim to increase the value of our service, to improve the system quality of care, improve our resource allocation, and to overall improve health outcomes. And like I said, we're burning down those silos, and we were able to get 20 people in the same room representing 10 different organizations from EMS, fire, regulation, academia, payers, to discuss what data points are we currently collecting, what data points are we collecting that are the same, and then also have a discussion of what we should also collect. What questions do we want our data set to be able to answer? Questions of return on investment, questions of quality improvement, and quality assurance. And started gathering around from the nation, from the folks that have been doing community paramedicine a little bit longer than us, started asking them, would you share what data points you're currently collecting? So we could start compiling a list of data points that we're already mostly collecting so that we can help to prove this return on investment. So our timeline started in October, and we're moving our way through until current. The process has gone through a few analytic reviews with data analytic support from our payer systems and Health Share of Oregon. We've cross-mapped our data points to the NEMSIS database, and for the folks that are from Canada or Australia or UK, that NEMSIS system is the national database for the 911 side on emergency response. We've also coordinated with other databases to collect data points that we want to include into our data set. We've talked to data analytics to make sure that our data fields and our acceptable responses are narrow and not free text. When we try to pull free text data, you can't do that, and it takes way too much time. When we developed this system, we had this big list of data points, and we said, okay, great, now how do we operationalize this? And operationalizing is the challenge, because in EMS, we hate charting. At least in our neck of the woods, EMS is not great on creating patient care reports and following through on quality charting. So we wanted to see how long is this going to take to do. So we built a beta front end to see how long does it take to go from patient encounter all the way through to the end of the chart. And so this beta testing took around, for the initial user, took 20 minutes to complete, and on subsequent, the time decreased. So we're looking right around the 10 to 15 minute mark for an experienced user of the beta front end. So continually, data analytics has been involved in our process to make sure that what we're collecting is actually going to answer the questions that we want it to answer. And furthermore, we're getting involved with the health informatics team at Oregon Tech, and Oregon Tech is the university that I represent. We're an engineering college that also does paramedicine and EMS education. And that health informatics team is led by senior student projects. So at this point, we have spent no money on this. This has all been a grassroots organization from in-kind donations, and we're creating the process as we go here. So into the future, eventually this is going to cost money. It hasn't cost a dime yet, but it will. And in the future, we're going to need some support from our regulators and from our other agencies and our partnering organizations to continue this process and to continue to provide the large end value that we really need to be able to prove the return on investment. So what? We've talked about a few things. We've talked about we need a return on investment. This data set will also help prove quality assurance, quality improvement, and it'll help set the standard of care for organizations currently doing community paramedicine, as well as organizations seeking to do community paramedicine into the future.
So the next steps, right? My name's Louisa, I'm from the government, and I'm here to help. And one of the exciting things about this project is the potential for the big data that's going to come out of that. One of the things that we really, really need is, the ends of 3, the ends of 14, the ends of 30 are great. And I think we've actually shown some really great efficacy with community paramedicine through those small ends. And part of that is because of what's going on globally. You guys have a lot of the big ends in Canada and Australia. We have multiple small ends across the state and all across the US. And combined, I think we've already shown that there's efficacy in community paramedicine. The cat's out of the bag. I don't think we're walking back 10 years to do something different. So I think the payers are actually coming to us and saying, we want more, but we've got to have the big data to do that. And what we see across, especially in Oregon, in that Tri-County area, is the big hand that community paramedicine has had on population health. EMS has had one foot in public safety, one foot in public health for decades. But what we really see, and where I think we're really showing a lot of great potential, is in that population health and how we impact the communities around us. The unfortunate thing is right now our payers that are really coming to us are looking at the indigent population and saying, we want the at-risk community to really be affected by community paramedicine. But with big data, what we're really able to do is not just hit these triple aims for the indigent population, for those that are only serviced at the government level in the US, but we're actually able to service everybody. We can use big data to show that community paramedicine isn't just an EMS transport, it's a medical service for everyone. And so as the regulator in the room, what I want big data to do is to drive that process forward to serve my entire community, not just the homeless, not just the uninsured, not just those that are at risk. And so we're looking for that big data to push those processes forward. I'm really excited to hear what CSA was doing in the standards process that's going on in Toronto. We're going to be watching you guys in that process because we want to be able to mirror some of those processes back at home. And one of the hard things that, as a regulator, that I know that you all have probably witnessed as well is that in that transformation of EMS over the decades, if you see one EMS system, you see one EMS system. And for us, we're kind of throwing a stake in the ground and saying we don't want community paramedicine to be that in the United States. We don't want it to just be one little tiny program. We want it to have these tentacles kind of that reach out to everyone and grab hold of everyone. I used to teach in the community colleges years ago, and I remember having a conversation, this is probably about 15 years ago, with one of my administrators and just saying, you know, EMS needs to grow up. EMS really needs to stick its neck out there and do something really transformational. And what's really exciting for me is that, you know, 15 years later, we're watching EMS grow up. We're watching EMS really mature and be what I think it really should be designed to be. And that's, of course, not just transport, and it's not just treatment, but it's prevention also. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your attention, and our contact information is here if you have any questions. We'd be happy to talk about the data set with you some more.
Yep, there it is, okay. So when you get there, if you just move the mouse around. Oh, this one needs to be syncing. Give us a minute, Dan. Let's see if this computer's still syncing. Okay, we had a last-minute adjustment with a movie, so we're gonna just handle this different this time.
Good music, at least.
I have to swap the
You missed
display.
it last night, I guess. But it was good. So I'm Brent from Hamilton again, and I'm just going to give you a good overview of our program that is focusing on hard-to-reach individuals, called the Social Navigator Program. Here's a little preview.
My name is Patrick O'Neill. I'm the paramedic social navigator that's been assigned to this position. When the action team was implemented back in May of 2010, there was a need to identify those individuals who were what they would categorize or classify as at risk due to mental health addictions and homelessness, that there was repeat interaction with the police. So the police came up with this idea about having a referral system to the agencies within the city.
What the Social Navigator program does, it brings all of our social agencies together at one table, and it allows us to have open discussions about individuals who need the support of our community, and it helps them to get into the proper support systems and proper care.
Yesterday I dealt with a gentleman who suffers from a mental health issue. There's something not right. I couldn't get it out of him what the actual condition was.
The intent of the program is to identify those individuals through police reference and sometimes external references.
And when I saw Patrick this morning, I mentioned this gentleman that we saw yesterday. So when he saw me out on patrol today, we stopped just to make sure that he's not on the streets, and if I had seen him, then I could point him out to Pat. Hopefully get this guy some help.
The Social Navigator now changes the dialogue when we discuss the people with these vulnerabilities to a circle of care, and the social agencies come together to provide the care that they possess.
So my role really is to assess those individuals that come to my attention and see how best I can get them connected or reconnected or augment their relationship with either a new service or existing service.
But the Social Navigator is a process of getting the proper assistance to people who need it. And a lot of time, it's just about connecting the people with the proper service that they require. And our action strategy officers are out there every single day. You'll see the officers are out there because people who are out on the street that need our assistance, that need the care of the Social Navigator, they're out there all the time as well, so we will be there to help them.
Thanks for that. Yeah. So that's our Social Navigator program. I guess I can sit down now. I'll go over a couple, just a little bit more of the background, talk about a little bit of the results. We've done a couple annual reports, and in the future, hopefully, we'll kind of standardize it and turn it into some publishable work that my good friend Peter from Australia stresses when we chit-chat at the table there. It was, I think it was mentioned, it was hard to do a meta-analysis on unpublished work. Thank you. Right, okay, so in 2010, the Hamilton Police, along with the city, they wanted to revitalize the downtown core revitalization program. So they put 40 uniformed and highly visible officers to walk the beat in the core, which is probably about 3 kilometers long and about 1 kilometer wide of downtown Hamilton, rough part of town. And they just wanted to make sure that, you know, they were cleaning it up, getting people panhandling off the streets. They are handing out tickets, arresting people, putting people in jail, court system, judicial system, overstressed. But then they realized that this type of, you know, punishment or this tactic wasn't really working very well. So they thought, and these people were repeating their interactions, they're repeating their violations. So they knew that they needed to do something else, that the ticketing isn't working. So they called upon, they realized that a lot of the patients had mental health, addiction issues. They didn't have funds, low income, they didn't have jobs, and they didn't have stable housing. So that's how the Social Navigator program came about. Sorry. There we go. So yeah, like the video said, our goals are to you know, connect the people that are most often disconnected. They don't have any services, or they've lost services because they don't like to follow rules or what have you. And then obviously reduce the strain on the judicial system, primarily at the very beginning, and now the healthcare system, of course, too. Our main outcomes, we discussed that a little bit in the video, were improve clients' ability to access and utilize health and community services, improve their lives, decrease their interactions with police, and decrease or identify our vexatious callers and paramedic services. And then the collaborations in the community, the police and paramedic service and the other community agencies. So the program came about with 3 main partners. Wesley Urban Ministries, which is a community service that is a nonprofit organization. We partnered up with obviously Hamilton Police and Hamilton Paramedic Service. Along with the city, they also funded the city funded a pilot study. Actually, they're funding it as pilot study into 2016 as the neighborhood renewal project. So we've identified the team members. We have a coordinator who kind of coordinates all the appointments. She kind of tells paramedics and the police officer what to do. So there's a police officer as a team member and a social navigator paramedic. I'm there to support as a supervisor. I support the paramedic in any of his needs. He actually will respond to 911 calls if they're code 4 or you know, urgent, and if he's in the area. So yesterday it was discussed that paramedics have we're kind of strategically placed in the community. We can access or like their knowledge, their experience to find these people, enhance that with the police and their intel. It's pretty amazing where we can find these people. We have one client who just set up camp on the escarpment. Hamilton's built kind of like they call it the mountain, but it's only about 300 feet or something. I don't know how big it is. But it's up on this escarpment, the Niagara escarpment. If you're down that way, have a look. He was just like, yeah, had a whole setup. We had to talk to him because he couldn't stay there, and he was trespassing. But the ability to find these people and to get them the help that they need is really crucial. The uniform is a little bit different than the police uniform. There's no gun, there's no intimidation factor, so the trust and the openness that these patients initially have with the paramedic is quite amazing when you compare that to the police officers that are out there as well. We get more results and quicker results. So the criteria to get a client into the program, the police at the beginning would only send patients to the social navigator program. There's no other referral process, so community, someone from the community can refer. We're now looking at high users in EMS, the vexatious users in our paramedic service. We're now sending them those patients, or clients, I should say now. And anyways, there's the list of the criteria. We intervene in the critical moments, so bail hearings, when they're being discharged or released from jail, being discharged from the hospitals or the mental health institutions that they're getting help from. We help them in times of need when they're getting evicted from their homes. And we're like a great safety net for these, and we're really meshing the services together so these people don't fall through the cracks again. Some unexpected developments. In 2012, the courts kind of recognized how vital this program was in Hamilton, and they started mandating the clients to the program. So we would set up, the courts would then stipulate that the person on their release conditions would have to report to the social navigator under an example of these terms here, which is pretty exciting. Just earlier this year, the judicial system gave us permission to do professional visits in the jail. So paramedic is now allowed to go into the jail, into where they're staying, connect with their clients, talk to them, and set up a plan, especially for finding housing and stuff right from the jail, which is like not even a regular police officer can go into the jail and talk to people like that. So it was pretty exciting. My new paramedic is not Pat. Pat is our old paramedic. We have a new paramedic. His name is Gord, and he's just loving, like, the whole thing is kind of opening up a whole new can of worms. We did some surveying for the community services. So some of the themes are, bringing us together, all the services together. We're really prompt during the hours that we work, 8 to 4. Otherwise, there's a few that are falling through the cracks there, but we're hoping to expand that on some more funding that we've kind of just secured. Just an overview of some demographics of our patients. We see that the average age is 37. That hasn't changed over the years much. A neat thing to note is the mental health illness, the highest, the most prominent illness is schizophrenia that we've dealt with. The social navigator paramedic, he's an advocate at the appointments. These people, they aren't able to convey what's actually going on with them when they go to medical appointments, and they're just he just acts as a great advocate for these hard to reach people. Some of our stats for the program. I can't see where it's going. Anyway, as you can see, it's just going up. All our referrals from the police services, and then now we've actually put some of our paramedics patients in there as well. So there is a huge need for us to expand and put another social navigator in there. Just the workload is too demanding, this report that we just finished for the 2015 was part of our leverage to go to council and get some more funding for that. On average week, we see and connect with 23 clients that are usually current. We take on 1 or 2 new clients a week, and they attend court and on behalf of the Crown or whatever, we speak on behalf of the patient and give evidence to help out the patient, whether it's a court mandated and different programs that they have to follow. And then we do attend lots of meetings, so a couple a week. Some of the common referrals that we make for those clients: mental health, obviously the primary one, and we connect them with primary health care, which is key, because they forget to go to appointments and things like that. So some of our outcomes, we see a big decrease in mental health calls for the police officers. So this is some older data that we're looking at here. This population, as you can see, it kind of falls off track. So we're always kind of revisiting new patients or previously discharged patients to just get them back on track. So we know that there's a piece of the program that we always have to, monitor how the previous clients are doing, just to make sure they're not falling through the cracks again. Some of our data for paramedic services, we have about 40% of our client intake have called 911 once or twice. They make up a lot of the transports in total. So this in 2014 is 130, but then the next year our clients gone up a little bit there because we had to put a push and we pushed a lot of patients over there from the paramedic service, up to 48 transports just for 45 clients. One of our clients is 82. He came to Hamilton in September. So I was, he did a lot of work with our guys, our frontline guys. So here's an example. Let's leave you with my case study of a vexatious caller who we worked with over 2 years approximately. She's an alcoholic in her 50s, had her own home, but just kept on calling all the time. Whenever she was drunk, whenever she wasn't drunk, whenever she ran out of booze, she needed more booze, whatever, she called. So we were able to charge her at the end of 2014 with conveying false messages, which was the first time we were able to do that for like a strictly just a paramedic patient that we had. Paramedic services overusage and vexatious caller. So what that did allowed us, she did serve some jail time, but she also was mandated to go to different programs and report to the social navigator paramedic, which is really exciting. We would set her up with group homes. She would get kicked out of group homes. One of her conditions was to never go back to her apartment that she owns. And then she'd manage to get herself back there and call 911 again, and then obviously she breached, and we could tell that she breached because we're picking her up at her home, and so then the whole process kind of started over again. So that's why we're seeing little like 13 calls with her. So yeah, we have another one that we just charged actually, and he's in court on Monday. So it's kind of a different look, I guess, on dealing with high users and actually putting them through the judicial system and stuff. But it seems to be working, and our next steps are to, standardize the program a little bit more, make the data that we're collecting more robust. We're on paper right now for this particular program, but we're working with McMaster University and the CHAP EMS team. We're going to be, setting up some program evaluation, and hopefully expanding to other regions. We have a neighboring region that's going to come in and shadow our program for about a day or two later this month, actually. So we're excited about that. And yeah, if you guys have any questions or anything before I let you go to lunch, that's it for me for now.
All right, great. Well, we're ahead of schedule now. Are any of you working with First Nations or tribal organizations at all? Okay, Chelsea from New Mexico would like to connect up with you so that you can share some experiences, okay? And we're on lunch break now. We'll begin promptly at 1 p.m.